And we're live, Chairman.
Thank you, Matthew. Good evening. Good evening to residents watching. Good evening to the councillors this evening. My name is Councillor Mark Corey, leader of the council, and I'm chair of the Environment and Sustainability panel. So good evening and welcome to this meeting on the 11th of March 2021. I welcome anyone who is visiting the meeting as well as those watching online and later. This meeting is being held remotely in line with the government's provisions and regulations introduced during the COVID pandemic to enable local government decision-making meetings to take place remotely. The meeting is being broadcast on the council's YouTube channel, and the meeting will also be available to view on the council's YouTube channel after the meeting. Councillors and officers taking part in the meeting are requested to mute their microphones now. Please activate the microphone when invited to speak and turn the microphone off again when you have finished speaking. Visiting councillors, members of the public and officers not taking an active part in the meeting are requested to turn off their cameras until they are invited to speak. When speaking, speak clearly and slowly. Please indicate to speak by using the raise hand facility, and the officers and I will look out for that. So I've introduced myself as chair. I will now invite members of the panel to introduce themselves and confirm their attendance. And I'll also invite shortly after that, those councillors who are attending to support our reports this evening. So in alphabetical order, I'll go to Councillor Chapman, Councillor Chillingworth, Councillor Davidson, Councillor Gocher, Councillor McCarthy, Councillor Scordis, and then Councillor Whitehead. So Nigel, please.
Thank you, Chair. Nigel Chapman, Councillor for Rural North Ward.
Good evening. I'm Peter Chillingworth, Councillor Peter Chillingworth from Rural North as well.
So Councillor Davidson hasn't joined us yet, so I'll go over to Councillor Gocher, please.
Councillor Mark Gocher, representing Castle Ward.
Good evening, I'm Councillor Sam McCarthy and I represent Shrub End Ward.
Lee Scordis, Old Heath, Hyde and Rowhedge.
Good evening, Councillor Lorcan Whitehead, representing Newtown and Christchurch Ward.
Thank you all. And I know we've got Councillor King on the call. I'll just check if we've got Councillor Goss as well. Councillor King, if you can come forward and introduce yourself, please.
Thank you, Leader, and hello, members of the panel. It's good to be here. David King, the Cabinet Member for Business and Resources with responsibility for the Woodland and Biodiversity project.
Thank you, David. If and when we see Councillor Goss come forward, if he does want to present and speak on an item, I'll ask him to introduce himself then. Okay, thank you. We'll move to just introducing others as well, the key officers attending the meeting this evening. We've got Mandy Jones with us, Rory Doyle, Maggie Ibrahim, Ben Plummer, Dan Gascoigne, Rosa Tamfield, Nick Day and David Carter. I hope you're all here, but if not, no worries. But if you'd like to introduce yourself in that order, please. Mandy.
Mandy Jones, Assistant Director, Place and Client Services. Good evening, Chair and all.
Good evening, everybody. Rory Doyle, Assistant Director, Environment.
Maggie Ibrahim.
Sorry.
Okay. Sustainability and Climate Change Manager.
Ben Plummer, Climate Emergency Officer.
Rosa Tamfield, Group Manager for Neighbourhood Services.
Dan Gascoigne, Chief Operating Officer.
Nick. Can hear you there, Nick.
Oh yes, thank you. Good evening, Nick Day, Woodland and Open Spaces Project Officer. Good evening.
Thank you, Nick. And David, please.
Charter, Contracts and Specialist Parks Officer.
Thank you, David. Couldn't hear you so well then, so if we do invite you to speak later, I'll make sure we can hear you. Thank you. And thank you to the Democratic Services officers who are running the meeting this evening. We have Matthew Evans and we have Gillian Bels. I can't remember your surname, Gillian Belsium. So thank you. We will move on to the next item, which is substitutions. Just before I do, I don't think we've got any this evening. I'm just hoping that Councillor Davidson arrives. When he does, we will ask him to introduce himself before he speaks. The introduction to the work of the panel is something I'll just outline now. The Environment and Sustainability Panel explores the methods of conservation of natural habitats and biodiversity through adapting existing practices or creating new ecological diverse environments. The panel encourages renewable energy generation and the carbon footprint reduction in both public and private sector spheres by examining not only air and water quality, but also plastic waste reduction, renewable energy generation, and many other things. The panel monitors the progress and implementation of the Council's Emergency Climate Action Plan and regularly reports to Cabinet and full Council. In terms of urgent items, there are none this evening. Item 4, declarations of interest. Can I just invite councillors if there are any reasons to declare an interest on any of the reports we have this evening?
Chairman, if I may, I don't think it's strictly necessary, but it's needed to do it here anyway. I represent the Council on the Denham Vale Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty Partnership and Joint Advisory Committee, and I'm currently chair of both of those parts of it. And it is mentioned once or twice, and I'll probably be commenting from that perspective.
Thank you, Nigel. That is clear. I see no other indications. Okay, thank you. We'll move on to item 5, which is have your say. And I know we've got 2 submissions. Please let me know, Matthew, if there are any other submissions that I've missed from Andrew Wilkinson and Grace Dark. And I believe they're not here this evening, but asked you to read those out, Matthew.
Yes, that's correct, Chair. So there are only the 2 submissions. The second one from Mr. Wilkinson is in relation to item 7. Do you want to take them both now?
Yeah, happy to take them both now. Thank you.
Okay, that's fine. Well, then if you'll bear with me, I'll read the submissions now to the, here's Councillor Davidson.
Good evening, Robert. Would you like to just introduce yourself? You're on mute at the moment, but...
Yes, Councillor Davidson, Councillor for Mersey and Pyfleet Ward. Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening. You haven't missed much yet. We're just starting the first items. Matthew.
Thanks, Chair. So the first item of Have Your Say is as follows. I am Grace Dark on behalf of Inform and Eco Colchester. Generating renewable energy within the borough is one of the objectives of the council. A great job has been done in installing solar panels on Colchester Borough Homes properties, 2,628, 44% of the housing stock in recent years, with benefits to the council, the tenants and the environment. Obviously, not all properties are suitable for solar panels. Can you confirm that all suitable council-owned properties now have the maximum number of solar panels installed? If not, what is the potential to increase the number of panels installed? While it is great that the council housing stock have had solar panels installed, most properties in the borough are not owned by Colchester Borough Homes. As you'll be aware, Essex County Council are currently promoting a bulk buy system for private owners to install solar panels called Solar Together. What activity has the council taken to promote this scheme to Colchester residents, and how have you communicated the scheme to the local housing associations? If no activity has taken place, can you promote the scheme through digital channels now, as the deadline is the 23rd of March, and communicate the offer through your association with local housing associations? And that's the end of the first Have Your Say submission, Chair. If you're happy, I'll carry on to the second, which is specifically in relation to agenda item 7 on the Colchester Woodland and Biodiversity project, and is from Mr. Wilkinson, who says, Inform, Eco Colchester and other local environment groups applaud the council's decision to declare a climate emergency and update its sustainability strategy. We agree with the setting up of the Colchester Woodland project and agreeing recently to extend its remit beyond planting trees to include all habitats and wildlife areas, and recognising the role that our wild areas have in achieving a range of environmental and health benefits. We would like the council to strengthen its policies and procedures by formally adopting the following. 1. Recognising and adopting the biodiversity hierarchy, reduce impact, retain and save. It is much more important, easier and cheaper to retain existing and established wildlife areas than to create new habitat. Rewild, restore, repair, reintroduce and replant throughout the council in the woodland project and planning procedures. 2. Ensuring that wild areas, green spaces, reserves and Grade A farmland are detailed in the local plan. Too much emphasis is placed on housing currently. We need to rule development areas out as well in a much clearer manner. Rule out local wildlife sites identified in the CBC Local Wildlife Site Review for development. 3. To recognise the importance of all species and habitats, not just woodland. Grassland and heaths, for example, are just as important. To formally state this as part of the Woodland project. 4. To recognise the importance of the area surrounding wildlife habitats and not just the habitat itself. For instance, do not develop up to the boundary of wildlife areas. 5. To recognise the importance of biodiverse green spaces to the health and well-being of residents. This has become particularly relevant during COVID. 6. Ensure that residents throughout the town have local access to wild areas. 7. All wild areas are important, but the large wild areas are of particular importance as wildlife needs space to thrive and residents need space to explore. Urban areas need green lungs. 8. That the council will seek to engage with local residents in decisions and in particular local environment groups. We are currently living in a time of rapid change where the effects are not known. Will Brexit have an impact on the population through lower immigration? Will the decline of shops in the high street release buildings for other uses, such as housing, particularly in the town centre? Will increased home working release office buildings for other uses? Will home working reduce the need to live and work in London, releasing buildings for homes in the capital, thus reducing the need for commuters to live in Colchester and work in London, 11,000? Or the need of the London boroughs to relocate residents, particularly the poorer residents, to Essex. For this reason, we would like the council to suspend all new major development, apart from those that currently have planning permission, to build and plan for the minimum number of houses required by law, and a suspension of implementing the local plan while future needs are reassessed. And that, Chairman, is the end of the submission.
Thank you, Matthew. There's a lot there in both examples. So I thank Andrew and Grace for those. They have been in touch with me just to make sure that those submissions were captured by us, and they will be, and I'm sure we'll circulate them to all members, but also to Councillor King, because especially the second one refers to the Woodland and Biodiversity project, which we'll come to later, and also to officers as well, just to understand some of the asks of us there. And actually, we have involved and engaged Eco Colchester over the last year or so since the Task and Finish group was created, and then this panel since then. And we want to continue to engage with them, to engage with other experts and with the public, to try and work together hand in hand and reach out to the public and to the experts simultaneously to try and get the right balance going forward. In terms of Grace's comments on solar panels, we were one of the leading authorities on solar panels across the country for coverage on our buildings. I know that was about 2 or 3 years ago, so I can take that back with officers and look into how much further we can go. I know that we were absolutely looking to maximise energy creation to begin with on south-facing buildings. Then we went a step further just to enable as many properties to be covered as would be viable for the solar panel installation, and then the payback for residents to reduce their bills. And we did that mainly on council stock, so that people in council houses actually got a reduced energy bill, which is really, really helpful. In terms of looking at other solar projects, we are doing that, and I hope that we're going to eventually have a business case soon for something along the lines of new solar technology and investing in something like a solar farm. Going forward as well, we are looking at many other technologies to improve the efficiency of our buildings, and I can ask officers to come in on that, or perhaps later in some of the reports we'll talk about that. But we've got the Northern Gateway projects, for example, the heat pump up there, the ground source heat pump, which is novel and innovative compared to the other pilot sites across the country. So happy to see that as a leading national example. But also on our council stock as well, we're looking to install air heat pumps that will bring in natural renewable energy rather than the use of the grid. There are many other examples as well, working with the Carbon Trust, how we are looking to reduce our carbon footprint, not just through solar, but through other means. and greening our council housing stock. We've put £4.4 million in just 2 months ago. We agreed that as cabinet. So there's many things I can reassure Grace on what we're doing in terms of solar and further solar expansion. That's something I will take back with officers. I'm unsure if any of the officers want to come in on that particular question to answer any further than what I've given. Otherwise, please do indicate if you do want to come forward. Got Councillor King, but I think that's probably on the next point, David.
It was, yeah.
Okay, thank you. All right then, so on Andrew's comments, there was a lot there, but what I would say is we are engaging with Eco Colchester and Inform, including Andrew, but also with Colchester Natural History Society, which David, you can tell us about shortly, how we engage with the experts with our Woodland project. And we've adapted it over the last 2 years to ensure that we are creating greater biodiversity, not monoculture of trees, that we learn from examples and ensure that we consult with local ward councillors, with residents where they come forward, with the Woodland Trust as well. So we'll hear about that shortly under item 7. So David, I can come to you now to help answer that question, or we can just come in at item 7 and include it there. David, what would work for you?
I think, Leader, just we'll deal with this at the question. I'll just say now very briefly that many of the points made are absolutely ones with which, both I personally and the team have deep empathy. There are clearly some limitations on what we can and can't do. Housing is a classic illustration, but many of the good practices, many of the points about hierarchy and preservation and improvement on what we have, rather than a restart, are absolutely part of the learning that we've taken on board. We'll come back in more detail. I think that would be the fair thing to do. It's a great list. I want to see how much of that we could adopt. It's a very adaptive program in its short life. It's got further to go. It is a program now. It's no longer a project. We started with tree planting, and it's much richer and it's going to be much better for the influence on ideas of others, including those partners and interested stakeholders you mentioned. So let's walk through it in the main item in detail. We'll follow up as needed afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, David. And there's many other points that were listed from Andrew's submission that I think over our the next few months, looking at our work programme and our agenda, we can tackle those points, and we will continue to tackle those points through this panel and also through the local plan panel as well. Okay, thank you. Item 6 are the minutes from the last meeting. Can I just ask councillors to look at those and to please pull out any incorrect items? And if not, if there are no problems, then can we by assent rather than dissent, just nod or agree, but please do tell me if you are unhappy with them. No dissent. Okay, excellent. Thank you for those who nodded. We'll agree those and move on to item 7, which is the first main item. And I will go to you, Councillor King, to introduce, and I know you have some slides, so over to you.
Thank you very much, Leader. And it's a word we use sometimes. It is a privilege being in a position to bring forward something that makes long-lasting change and is running with the grain of modern times in a productive way. And this is absolutely one of those projects growing, as I've said, to a programme that's at the heart of change in a really impactful way. The paper itself, on which the panel will have a view, and the officers and I'll be happy to take questions as we need. I thank Rosa and her colleagues for it. Is rich in its detail, and it reflects that range of change. And the things I will bring out from the paper, and I'll just go to my personal view on the slide in just a second and then ask Rosa to continue, is just that change in and transition in focus inside just over a year. And I want to pay tribute to the team for their ability to adapt, because now we've gone from tree planting to planting trees, widening diversity, looking at habitats, enhancing the environment, encouraging our communities to connect. And it's not often, as we've said elsewhere, that you can get 100 people to volunteer for anything. It's not often you can get a queue, as shown here, Wivenhoe leader, turning up for taking trees to plant themselves. And the paper, I hope, gives some justice to the breadth and range, from planting and greening to the Colchester orbital, to less mowing, to a more thoughtfulness about urban tree planting. And we are at the beginning of a real explosion of interest in this programme and the range of subjects addressed by it, which the team will talk through and will take questions on, is transformative, and it's not often we can say that. So the points on the slide, I hope, speak for themselves. I hope we've demonstrated we've made really significant progress. I hope we've demonstrated a change. We've grown up from a set a target, plant trees, to swiftly understanding, with the help of stakeholders and partners, that we had to have a much more sophisticated process and approach than that. We have the skills in the organisation, we have the skills beyond CBC as well, and we have the partnerships that make that now possible. And we have welcomed, if I give ourselves a little credit, we welcomed a challenge, we welcomed the opportunity to change the focus, and it's been fantastic, making a real difference despite all the difficulties of the pandemic. Now, in that process, it's not possible not to find out the hard way that some things need to be different. And it's been, again, great that we've had from Colchester Natural History Society and others views on how to do better. It's been great that we've had their help on reviewing at least some of the sites on which we have planted and will plant, and it's our hope that they and others will continue to work with us. So we've done some learning, we've done some adaptation, we've done some great work, and we've connected with many residents and groups. As I say, learning and lessons are part of this, and I hope we'll need less of that. We'll be more finely tuned going forward. And as I put on the slide, we have recognised the need to reconcile and strike a new balance between woodland planting, biodiversity gain and care, and also human activity. So one of the big things, one of the big points I've made, I'm sure it'll be taken, is when we do any substantial planting, we're thinking about natural walk and run-throughs. We're thinking about human beings and their need to walk and move, for nature to have its own corridors, and there will be a subtlety to planting. This will not be plantation in straight lines. This will be shaped for human activity in the existing landscape. It will allow for sunlight and, as I say, for nature and connection. And the last point, and it's touched on, it will be in both the paper and in the slides that follow, is we all absolutely accept that passion here is appropriate. A lot of council business can be a bit dry, although it's about people. The environment and its impact upon humans, their physical and their mental health, and the impact upon nature and all the many forms that takes, all of that, and making an emotional connection to it and with our volunteers and through them with their families and others, that's a really big deal. And we've tried to be, and I think we have, shown that we accept that's central, front and centre in what we're going to do. The real difference we'll make will not be in planting tens and tens of thousands of trees. It will be in ensuring that people feel a connection to that changing environment, want to help it, want to support it, want to play their part, and feel the better for doing it. I'm happy to pass the slides back to Rosa, and then with colleagues take questions later.
Thank you, Councillor King. If I can have the next slide, please. The report sets out our evolution of the project. So we're now just coming to the end of year 2. And as we looked at year 2, we set out 5 core themes that we wanted to focus on and deliver. So the 5 themes being planting and greening, as described by Councillor King, also urban planting, public engagement, stakeholder development and planning. So looking to the future, looking at our policies and our strategies. So in terms of planting and greening, at the end of year 2, we have achieved 14,000 trees planted. But as we've described, the project now has evolved and moved away from just planting trees as an approach from year 1 to now encompassing things like trees, shrubs hedgerow planting, as well as other activities. So in addition to the tree planting, we've also identified and allowed 14 sites for self-generation, where we don't go in and plant trees, but we enable trees to grow for themselves. We've also phased out the use of glyphosate weed killer, an important process and something that we've been quite passionate about, and that has now coming to an end. We've still got some areas that we're working and action planning for the year ahead, but it's been a really big and important step. And in addition to that, we've also looking at reducing the frequency of grass cutting on verges to some of our main routes into Colchester, and looking to change our management of those verges and trying to encourage wildflower. And we've also trying to connect better with our parishes and town councils and other areas in our communities. And we've set up a template of how we can now work with those local areas to enable rewilding and reduce grass cutting as well. And that's a template that we're hoping in the future we can continue to roll out. Next slide, please. The other area of work is urban planting. So we are ambitious in that we want to introduce more green infrastructure into our urban areas and open up access to green spaces. And so the project team is linking into the work with Colchester Orbital, and with the team we're also working to incorporate more planting into the town centre through both current and emerging projects as they're developing in the coming years. Next slide, please. People is a really important part of the project, and so public engagement is a key part of the work that we're doing, and lots of work has been undertaken to involve and encourage our local communities to love and to take care of their local environment. It has been particularly challenging in the last year as a result of COVID, but no less important. And the kinds of activities that we have been able to achieve are things like activity packs with information about the projects and templates for signage, which was sent out to schools, along with guidance about seed gathering activities. And our future plans are looking at how we can further engage with those schools to take part in things like bee and butterfly counts. Before the national lockdown restrictions being implemented, the public were also asked to sign up to volunteer, and as Councillor King mentioned, we had over 100 volunteers register. So there's a real passion and a real drive to support this project or this programme as we're going forward, and we're keen to keep those engaged, particularly as now we're emerging out of the last lockdown. And we've got lots of activity, as you would appreciate, because of the difficulties and the restrictions that we've had in 2020 online through our social media and our website, which is constantly being updated and has been refreshed numerous times over the last year. Next slide, please. Continuing with the people theme, stakeholders is a really important part as well, and we've been working to try and develop those relationships and ensuring that we've got a really sustainable a legacy with this project or programme. Public engagement will be a key focus for the project in the future year. And so what we would like to do is just thank and recognise those that have worked really closely with us this year, and in particular, Together We Grow, the Woodland Trust, and the informal stakeholder group that has emerged this year. And we have clear ambitions to continue to grow that stakeholder group to, as Councillor King described, try and develop and evolve this project as we go forward. Next slide, please. So we've got ambitious plans for planting in the coming year, and officers have been actively exploring large sites, undertaking surveys and assessments, but also reviewing how we integrate this project into existing work, strategies and policies going forward. So some of the things that we've been looking at in the last year is looking at additional planting at the Colchester Northern Gateway site, for example, looking at opportunities to support the Bee Line, which is a campaign run by the conservation charity Bug Life, which is aimed at creating a series of insect pathways. And there are particular development routes that can go through Colchester that we're looking if we can restore and help plan new wildflower rich areas to support that programme. And Not least, are officers looking to change or influence existing policies, landscape guidance, particularly reference to urban trees and tree planting in rear gardens, greening corridors, etc. So we will continue with that work going forward. But we've talked a lot in this little presentation about the work that the project team has undertaken and in particular the impact it's had on greening and biodiversity. But as I said, the success of this project is its people. And so we've got a short video that explains, is a presentation basically from the people who were involved in the project and can talk to you a little bit more about it and the impact that it's had. So I can ask for officers to show that.
I'm Nick Day. I'm the Council's Woodland and Open Spaces Project Officer.
Hi, I'm Wayne Setford from Together We Grow Community Interest Company.
Hi, I'm Pete. I've been planting some trees.
My main role is to identify sites that are suitable for tree planting and to make sure that we get the right number of trees and the right type of trees on site for others to do the planting.
Last year we were involved with delivering the Colchester Woodland project as it was then. We did 21 planting days with the community, our volunteers from Together We Grow and the wider volunteer network around Colchester.
It's made it clear how many local residents are interested in tree planting and how much they value the green spaces around the borough.
So this year we haven't been able to engage with the public as much as we would have wanted to. However, we do a lot of work in the realms of mental health and support and well-being. We've been working really closely this year with Refugee Action Colchester, supporting a whole group of people all the way through the year. But during the winter, we had a plan for a men's mental health support group. And that was born out from some of the research that we had done with some of the community. And some of the men we found that we weren't engaging with fully. And they wanted to do some heavier work, some work outside, some work together. And that's why we've pulled the two projects together. So the Colchester Woodland and Biodiversity project, plus some of our men's mental health projects. And these guys have been out and about on various different days throughout the winter, supporting their mental health, getting to know each other, getting to know us. And they've got so much out of it. It's been so important that they feel they're giving back to a community which is not, hasn't been the community they've grown up in, but they really want to give something back. We've been talking about memories from home countries, planting trees with parents, planting trees with family and the memories that evokes. And they've been talking about coming back here in 20 years' time to some of these areas that we've been planting and sitting under the shade of those trees with their children. And I think that is just so important that even individuals that aren't Colchester born and bred have really, really engaged with this project for their own mental health, their own well-being, but just to improve the community that they live in.
I'm getting out and enjoying the green spaces and meeting the people and sharing in the enthusiasm that they have in creating woodland on our green spaces.
I think it's a great project. I mean, increasing the level of tree coverage in our kind of urban areas, which is what we've been doing here, has been amazing. The knowledge of the officers involved has been just fantastic. You know, they really, really know what they're doing. They have expert knowledge of planting, of trees, of biodiversity, and that's been wonderful to be part of. But more than anything, it's been seeing the smiles on some of these guys' faces and seeing them really flourish whilst planting these trees. I mean, that's what we're about. We're about people and plants, but really it's people first, and it's about seeing these guys flourish and give something back to their community and feeling much, much more embedded in their community by the work that they're doing.
It's been really good. I mean, on a personal level, it's just about being outdoors and, you know, just making a little gesture to make things a little bit here in Colchester. But mainly, I've mostly enjoyed just mixing with other people here and meeting people I haven't met before, people from a different way of life and that sort of thing. So yeah, for me, it's been all good.
so that just comes to the end of the presentation. I'll hand back to Councillor King if you like, Chair, or back to you, Chair.
Back to the chair will be fine. Let's talk through what is most of interest to the panel. Thank you very much, Rosa, and to your colleagues as well, including the stars of tonight's video.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Rosa, for that. Next time, Rosa, we'd like to see you there as well, mixing up the diversity there. But I know we've got great officers, and the people up at the Together We Grow project is fantastic. Developing our own seed project there rather than just buying in plants and trees is a really good idea. Much better for biodiversity all round. Okay, so we've got the paper in front of us as well. So I asked the panel if they want to come forward with questions for our presenters and questions of the report. I first of all have Councillor Gocher, then Councillor Chillingworth and Councillor Chapman. So Mark, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to everyone who's worked so hard on the project. It's excellent. My questions really are about how do we take the project beyond just trees? How do we go further down the biodiversity route that's beyond just the trees? So, I mean, what I'm thinking of in particular is in terms of biodiversity loss, there are a number of things that are really problematic in this country. And one of them is the loss of meadows. You know, we've lost something like 97% of meadows since the Second World War. So are we looking at identifying any areas that could just simply be turned into meadowland? You know, obviously we've got the roadside verges that if we don't cut them, it's a form of meadowland. But are we looking at any other sites where we can restore at least some meadowland? Secondly, another big problematic area is the loss of ponds. Again, since the 1970s, and starting even before, many rural ponds have been filled in, you know, as part of the changes to agriculture. And that's, of course, why ponds in gardens are so important. But are we looking at restoring any ponds in any areas? Because, you know, that is a massive problem. And ponds are a major source of biodiversity. Third question is, in terms of things like the wildlife corridors for bees that were mentioned in the presentation, are we inviting the public, you know, the ordinary residents to maybe donate a garden where they can donate their garden and people go in and improve the biodiversity of their own gardens? I mean, that might not be possible, but that's just an idea. And then the last question is, in terms of the comments about greening the town centre, are the people from this project liaising with Amphora Trading in some of the things they're doing? For example, the Nicholas Square project, which is excellent, but it could be greener in terms of what's being proposed. So are we liaising with them to maybe green some of the things that they're doing a bit? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Some excellent points there, some of which we definitely are working on already and some which are new. I'll go to David shortly. I know that Rosa talked about the different ways in which we can expand biodiversity much greater. The project has evolved. David explained that, and I think Rosa did too. So we definitely are going in the right steps. And in terms of the bee corridors, I think it's fantastic to invite people to donate parts of their garden. I think it's a really good idea. And also with gardens, hedgehogs are massively endangered these days. You can get hedgehog holes, things like that. I think we're definitely put into the project. It's about getting as much engagement as possible. I think we can make these projects possible. Obviously with COVID, it's been much more difficult, but they are definitely on the radar. So I'll pass to David and then Rosa just to wrap up some of those answers, please.
First of all, Mark, thank you very much, and it's great you see it as we do. It's evolving and changing as described. I love your list, and I'd want to make sure that when we go off and away and talk about what's practical, we'll do as much of this as that is. If I sort of start off the collective response, I think it would be by saying that some of these ideas need nothing more than, and it's still a significant thing, than engagement and publicity and connection. The more that we can, back to that emotional point, the more we can connect with people, the more we make it likely and possible through a network of groups, local interest groups and so on, that we go from a few people to hundreds of people who start to think differently about their gardens and what their gardens can do. You know, my view has changed. The landscape near me, I've been planting wildflower seeds, and I know many other people are doing that as well. And as a local councillor, I've done it, and many on this call will also be playing their small part. So I think there is something about seeing lots of ways to get to the same kind of solution, but some of those great ideas are about a big canvas. And so here we have to get into what land we have accessible. And I'd like the team to sort of talk about that, the conversations they're having with landowners, because that's where some of these possibilities might be addressed in the right kind of scale. Policy also matters. So talking to a developer in the last day around an area of woodland, the attitudes are completely different to sort of 10 or 15 years ago. It's all about taking a pride in what they've got, and it includes, in this particular case, it includes ponds. I'll sort of stop with one particular area which I think which does interest me, and on which I've asked the team to start work, and they have. It's touched on in the report. It's Cymbeline Meadows. The best of that, so we go back to where we should start, which is understanding the ecology and the biodiversity well first. But some of this is, in biodiversity terms, is pretty arid, and there is real scope there, I think, to balance off some of the declared objectives, so extra tree planting towards what is the railway line and the housing in the distance would be a natural, maybe other places and locations as well. But I think that's where we might, in looking for a mixed use that still allows for both nature and human access, for that emotional connection, that environmental gain, to look at things like meadows, and indeed, why not? Let's have a look at rural ponds. So, and it certainly would be designed, I have to say this, alive to your third point, which is wildlife corridors. So thank you for the ideas. I'm sure the team will have a view. We certainly will reflect on them, but that would be my start, and I'll turn to Rosa.
David, I'll just come in there, Rosa, before you do, just because the term mixed use typically is about development. I just want to be absolutely clear. When you were talking about Cymbeline Meadow, you're talking about some trees at one point, and talking about the fact that we'll improve biodiversity in the meadow, but the mix of allowing human access to enjoy it. That's what you
Yes, absolutely, Leader. Thank you. I welcome that clarification. There's enough hares running around. Actually, quite a good analogy, isn't it? Hares will be fine.
Thank you, David. Rosa, over to you.
Thank you. Yeah, I think Councillor King, to be fair, has covered most of what I would relay back. So my report today is very much about what we've achieved in year 2, and to really set out that the project has evolved quite significantly from where we started 2 years ago. And with my team of officers and with the stakeholders that I'd outlined, we're looking now at year 3. And so the things that you've described there, Councillor Gocher, they're all the considerations for us going forward. We have got parameters around that, as Councillor King has outlined. There's only so much we can do on our own land, but that's where it's really important as we go forward into year 3. We look at that development of our stakeholder network and our support, and see how we can also support and enable either residents or landowners to take those active steps to support this programme. I think it's quite appropriate now, actually, as you've said it, Councillor King, is more of a programme now than a project, and start keeping that evolution of this. So ponds is not something that we've looked at in year 2. It could be something that we look at going forward into the future, but with all of these things, it is about the right approach, the right location, the right site, to make sure we make the right impact, both for biodiversity and ecology, but also for the residents and locals that live there. And you talk about gardens. Yes, we almost need a pledge from residents to kind of contribute towards this programme, and look at how their gardens can contribute to insect or bee corridors, and we'll be developing that thinking and how we can engage that. It has been really difficult this last year because of the impact of COVID. We haven't been able to get out into communities. We can't get face to face with people. So hopefully that will be a much more positive direction for us as we go forward into year 3. And in terms of the town centre, yes, we are actively involved, myself and my offices, in all the conversations about development work going forward in the town centre and other areas, to make sure that greening is on the agenda for those. And again, it's around limitations, but we're actively at the table having those conversations and making sure it's on the agenda. So yeah.
Thank you, Rosa, and thank you, David. And I know, David, that the Fixing the Link project has definitely greened much more than it originally was as well, and looking at urban planting of trees along North Station Road one day soon, hopefully. I just wanted to say one thing about ponds as well. I think in relation to that is to do with wetland areas. It's something we did touch upon when we were looking at a wider bid into government with Inform, which was about sort of salt marshes and actually how carbon secretion can be greater through those projects, but they're quite a bit bigger and not always owned by us. But I think it's something, again, to look at in the next few years of those aspirational projects that aren't just something that are right in front of us. It's a bit different, and hopefully the public will be engaged with that too. Anyway, thank you. Great questions. We've got Peter next. Peter, please.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Yep, a really great project, and I'm so pleased it's going so well. I'm very keen on this community engagement. The more we can involve the community in the not just the enjoyment, but actually the hard work of planting, I'm sure they will appreciate that it's a community affair. They can get to know their neighbours perhaps, and good open air labour. With regard to parish councils, thank you for providing trees for at least one of my parish councils. And I think I would encourage you to try and engage more with the parish councils. Great work in the town centre, but yes, we've got a lot of communities out there who could also join in if they were given the encouragement. On the other side, there is a problem with working with nature. And I'm sure you will have found in the planting season 1920 that the drought during the spring of 20 was very difficult when you're planting trees, bare-rooted trees, as I did. I planted 165 and I lost 80% of them. I don't think it was because I planted them at the wrong time. They were planted before Christmas. They were looked after, but we lost them. And I wondered if the council had suffered also losses, and if they were able to catch up in this planting season. Have you managed to replace those that were lost? Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. I know we had similar issues. David, please.
Thank you, Peter, for all of that. I'll take it in the sequence that you raised it. The emotional connections, that's the real prize. And some of you, Mark, you have before me, and both Marks, I think, and others have perhaps got wiser to this than I, though I'm grey haired, did. I'm trying to catch you up. You know, it's that emotional connection in ourselves and with other people to the environment is so hugely beneficial. That's the prize. If we can, like we are mostly so far, keep this cross-party, keep this a higher aim and a higher objective, make those connections, work with every single partner we can, keep people in the ring, then those networks of partnerships, interested groups, people who don't deal with each other will connect. And Peter, as you described, you know, that's just good for, it's good for human beings. Haven't we had a lot of connection this last year? You know, this would be one of the great ways in which we can connect people up and do a good. I'll ask Nick Day, but Rosa might want to add as well in a moment, to address some of those conversations with landowners and parish councillors. Certainly, it's absolutely on the list, and we've made some progress. There's illustration in the report of progress at Wivenhoe. We absolutely will be going back round that again. It's one of the most important things because the area, and again, that point about connection and the shared set of objectives really matters to us. And lastly, when it comes to tree loss, you know, it's good to hear is not meant as it sounds. We had the same experience, I suppose, is what I'm saying, as you may have heard from some of your colleagues, and we've had a lot of conversations, particularly with some residents, a small number, it's true, but with a passion themselves around Lexton Springs. When I first went up there to have a look, before we had a complaint, I had that sense of loss and shock you have when anything that's growing has not survived. And you know, look at this. We have replaced or in the process of replacing that. Absolutely is the aim. Sometimes we take the opportunity, I think, as at Lexton Springs, to do a bit of reshaping, mindful of some of the other feedback we had. But it's very hard to address. We've looked and talked about watering. It's not impossible, but it's a real challenge if you've got thousands of trees planted for obvious reasons. Where we've got more mature trees, and it's a side project that we're hoping to link up with a new partner that many of you may know, called Trees for Streets. That involves active sponsorship in the urban setting. So the future may give us some opportunities, but when it comes to mass planting, all we can do, in my view, is look very carefully, and we are, where we plant. So an illustration that Nick Day can elaborate on will be at Lexton Springs. We move some of the planting areas of the next phase into the dampest possible soil with the most available shade. It's all relative. Some years we will have a tough time, and we absolutely, as you described it last year. I hope that's some help. Mark, if I may, I'll go to Nick Day and ask Nick to talk with his colleagues around the wider approach, the progress, what we think might come next in this coming year, because some conversations are by their nature in progress. And he might want to elaborate also on the learning we've taken from loss in the last year.
Yes, it's certainly true that we've learned a lot this year from our stakeholder partners. We have listened and we have had our site surveyed by conservationists from the Colchester Natural History Society, and they have advised us on where we should be going back and replacing trees, and where we should maybe relocate them within the site but on different areas. So we have made some real changes. And we have also, they have identified for us areas that they feel would be better maintained as grassland, a better habitat. So we have done that, and we have increased, and we will be increasing as we go into the summer. There will be some areas of open space where we traditionally gang mow regularly, and we will retreat from that and allow the grass to grow, and there'll be natural regeneration of probably trees and shrubs as well. So we have definitely learnt lessons from our stakeholders, and we have changed our view, and the way we'll be proceeding next year will be slightly different from last year. We have also had advice about bodies of water, rivers and streams running through the sites, and we are looking to engage with volunteers to do some conservation and clearance work going forward on those areas too. So, I mean, I've only been in post almost a year now, but my job role has changed significantly, you know, because it's not just planting trees, it's become much more wider and much more enjoyable, and learning from experts in the field. It's always beneficial.
Could you talk about parish councils and landowners, Nick? Are those
experiences? Oh yes, I actually did contact every parish and town council in the borough last May. Some, of course, because of COVID, couldn't engage. Some came back to me and said they had no land suitable for tree planting. But we had about 6, 7 or 8 different parishes that came to us and said, we'd like to get involved. I visited their sites, I gave them some advice, and 6 or 7 of them actually agreed to take trees from us for planting. Then, of course, the COVID lockdown came, and some of those parishes couldn't continue, but they still want to be involved, and we will go back to them later on this year to see if they can do some planting next year. But there were 3 or 4 who did take trees from us because they were able to plant them themselves, either in their residents planting in their gardens, or they actually had staff who worked for them and they could legally plant through the lockdown. But the public planting, the volunteer, the large-scale public involvement that we were all looking for was just had to be postponed because of the COVID restrictions. But it's certainly something that we hope to build on later on this year and next winter.
Thank you, Nick. It'd be fair to sort of say two extra things. I think that in all these discussions, as in the Wivenhoe example in the paper, the reassurance we would want to give panel members is we've absolutely got it as you described it. It's not just about tree planting. This is understanding the ecology, understanding what is best, taking advice, adding it to our own expertise, and as at Wivenhoe, having an adaptive approach in which we help and enable ownership of what will happen next locally. So an approach to no-go, a template, authorization, help, so that people can find what's right for their locations and the right ecology. But the question I've got for you again, if I might, Nick, our colleagues I think here on the panel will be interested, would be the approach of landowners. And we've had a conversation about this, that some of this is about government grants and policy can help or can slow the availability of landowners. They want a grant if they're going to give up land and that kind of thing. Have you got a few words on that you might be able to share?
Yes, we've actually got a local landscape architect who has set up a landscape conservation trust to engage in that sort of large-scale planting, and we have invited him to attend and do a presentation at our next project team meeting later on, early in April. So we're hoping to learn from him. He has got experience with working and developing planting schemes in a large scale with private landowners. So we're hoping to learn from him, engage with him, and take that forward in a big way.
Thank you. Peter, that's a bit wider than your question, but I hope it's very much in the spirit of it.
Yes, thank you. Just to make the point that I've been helped hugely by the Woodland Trust, who actually have produced the trees that I had to replace this year. Thank you.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. And they're, an important partner for us, as you will know. They're providing us with trees this year, and it's great to have a source of expertise. They've been at this a long time. Thank you.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Nick, and thank you for the question, Peter. And yes, the Woodland Trust have done similar, as David says, with us replacing some of the trees that we planted before. I'll move on to Nigel, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just, three or four points I really want to make. I welcome, it's a tremendous report, isn't it? And great to hear what the programme is now taking on board. And certainly I welcome the sort of change of emphasis, if you like. It still does worry me a bit about the sort of emphasis that it seems to be in the press and all those sorts of things about plant a tree. And nobody really talks about which tree it should be in which place. It's getting the right tree in the right place very often. And I think there's a bit of education there that maybe we should take on board as well, so that the public understand that it's not just singing any old tree in any place, because clearly in some places are totally unsuitable for certain trees. So that's great to hear. We've sort of got that message ourselves, as it were, and try and pass that on. One of the other points is the thing about corridors. Bee corridors are fine. I just don't know how it can be done precisely, but there's a thing about small mammal corridors as well. It's easy to plant a little woodland somewhere, but actually how you can get small mammals into that woodland for the future is virtually impossible unless you've got some sort of corridor for them. I do seem to recall that motorways verges are now being left, or just not being left, but they do encourage mammals to travel along them, I gather, from A to B. I wonder if there's something we could look at perhaps in some of our major roads now coming to Colchester's northern approaches and some those sorts of roads, whether we can actually encourage the edges of those to be more helpful to wildlife and so on. It's very important we try to encourage all those sort of smaller species to have some sort of way of moving about. So that's just a question whether we can try and look at that in some respect. And it follows also on to something else I was thinking about. One of my parish councils, and I think I raised this last September, we talked about verges, and the council mow a lot of the verges in the rural areas, and some of the parishes would like them left as they are. I'm not sure how far we're getting with that, but But the problem with that is it's a dichotomy here, isn't there? A lot of people think if you leave a verge, it will be a wonderful wildflower meadow within months, but actually a wildflower meadow does need managing. So there's a message that needs to go out here. If you're going to not mow verges, frankly, a lot of them will end up very attractive, but they will be wild ordinary flowers, not wildflower meadows that we all think full of poppies and all this sort of thing. We've got to let nature take its course in a lot of those places. I think there's a bit of management of perception needed there as well. But I think if we could encourage just ordinary verges to grow as they will with sort of sheep's parsley, or I'm not sure the difference between sheep's parsley and cow parsley, whether they're the same thing or not. But however, those wonderful white tall flowers that come on verges, some sort of parsley, are wonderful, and they just come up naturally, don't they? So I think that sort of idea of trying to work out exactly how we can look after verges would be helpful, and that also would be a corridor for wildlife, I think. The other parishes, that's the other thing I wanted to raise. It's going a bit broader than this. One of my parish councillors actually appointed one of their councillors as a sustainability champion. Now, I do wonder whether there's a much broader remit here for the borough to take on some sort of working with somebody like that, who's obviously very enthusiastic to do the right thing in the village, and to give them some advice, not just around tree planting and that sort of thing, but some other things that maybe the village could take on board to help with this whole climate change agenda. So maybe I can just pose that as a question, the possibility. It may be something that's been raised through the Clerks Forum, I don't know, but it's something that could go through the Clerks Forum if it hasn't been done already, I would suggest. And the final thing, a small question, the tree protectors we use, I take it they are green and are not going to litter the countryside for years to come with horrible sort of sheaths that never go anywhere, but just fall off and litter the place. I think that was all my points, Chairman.
Thank you, Nigel. A lot there. I'll just speak quickly on the Wivenhoe example. Of course, I would as a Wivenhoe representative, but this has been done in such a community-led way rather than us as a council. We have supported, enabled, and of course had to step back in certain cases. But I think this would be a fantastic case to publicise more. So it is in the paper, but also we're only still in the early stages. And it has come from a resident who's quite expert in the subject. And we are going to have to put signs to explain what's going on so the public do understand. But in some cases, you can obviously accelerate the meadow effect, but in most cases, you should let it grow naturally, and that's what's going to happen. So I think that we're getting there. We've got different bits and pieces that have come out from the team about promoting wildlife in our gardens, etc. But I think we do need to bring it together to put it through. For example, the Parish Clerks Forum. Definitely, that would be very productive. So, Rosa, I'm sure if we have time in the day, we can look at that as well. David, I'll come back to you and to Rosa on those points.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Nigel. The approach to wildflowers and letting it happen, it needs us to allow the space, and it needs us to be patient. Is really what you're saying. I think on both of those we've made some progress. The team, I'll ask David Carter, as he started us off on some of the no-mow, if he might want to add a word after I've given a few remarks. But we're certainly making progress, and the policy is really clear that, from me with the team, that where we can, and we know we need tidy edges, and we know areas where there will be, by good practice, good sense, open space that's kept in traditional mode fashion, but where we can, we're looking, and I'll ask the team to talk through this, to do just what you've described, to allow nature to take over. They've also made progress with me, which is good, isn't it? They've encouraged me not to go and press for instant wildflower, reseeding and work, because it's quite expensive, but you can do it, and you can therefore go for your almost instant. It does still take a year or two, sort of shift towards what you described, what we have in our mind and what I had in my picture on the opening slide. So I've been talked out of it. With some exceptions, I think this will be a case of allowing nature to sort of take its course and see where it gets us to. I think the last point for me on this would be about messaging. Actually, get that it's different to what people have in their mind in terms of project. Now, a program was described. There's some education absolutely in it, which I go back to connections. and working through others is a crucial part of that. And Mark, your suggestion of a case study taken Wivenhoe would be a great idea. I think wherever we can find those, we should. Nigel, you mentioned the main roads coming into Colchester. I'm not the only one. Mark's been party to some of those conversations. I've had that discussion with Kevin Bentley, who's very much in the same mind. So it's then getting the machine of highways to make the necessary adjustment. But we are making progress on that, and we'll be focused on this coming year. The words we've exchanged between each other, which is along the lines of make it happen, actually turn to effect. And one small bit of encouragement for me is for those who know the main roads down from the stadium into Colchester, there's going to be a controversial right-hand side bus lane and segregated cycleways coming through and loss of habitat. But it will have to be replaced as best it can be. And absolutely, the opportunity will be taken there and all the way up, from my perspective, to turn this to wildflower, no-mow, and to make the best of changes that are necessary to ensure that we look at the future ecology in a very, very different way. So, and I hope that if we do that well, that we can spread that example elsewhere. I hope that's some help. Mark, if I may, I'll go to David Carter and see if David would like to add something to what's been discussed this evening and the last few points in particular.
Thank you, Councillor King. Yeah, just to add really on the wildflower verges, we've been looking at areas along some of the main roads into Colchester where we can change the grass cutting regime. At the moment, the grass cutting regime is during the growing season to cut every approximately 3 weeks. We're now looking at areas where we can leave part of those verges to basically manage as wildflower areas. So the cutting regime will change from every 3 weeks to cut once a year. And because this is a fairly new project, we're using this new growing season coming along as a trial area, so we can monitor the areas, see what types of flowers come through. Is it suitable areas? Obviously, we have to still take into account sight lines and safety for vehicles, so there is quite a strict criteria which we have to go through to make sure the verges we're leaving to grow wildflowers are suitable. But we've got a number we're looking at this year. We will trial that, and a bit like the Wivenhoe project, we think, as that's a pilot project as well, as these get more and more successful, we can see this growing year on year, so there'll be more and more verges left for wildflowers as we go forward. And again, a bit like the naturalising sites. Well, these are not big sites. These are areas on existing open space, which are adding, again, improving wildlife corridors around where we've got existing, basically an open space, which is short mown grass, hedges around the edge. So we're leaving a fairly large margin to naturalise around, so that will provide a habitat corridor and left to naturalise eventually into shrub and tree growth.
Thank you, David. That's great.
Thank you all.
Sorry, the point about the tree protectors.
Are biodegradable.
Thank you. Excellent. David, thank you, David. I'm reading Robert's surname. Robert, please. Councillor Davidson.
Thank you very much, Chairman, and thank you to all the team for their enthusiasm and on what is a massive project, of course, and something that's going to last well into the next century. I think I've got a few points to make, and obviously none of them have got quick solutions, but I did take on board what other people have said about the diversity. For example, Councillor Goetsch was talking about meadows and lakes and ponds and everything else, and I think it is that diversity of habitat that's actually so critical. And trees are impressive when they grow and mature, but actually there's so much more wildlife and many invertebrates that you get with an open landscape. And one of the questions I was going to ask is whether you've actually considered grazing animals. Obviously you've got rabbits, hares, a few muntjac and others, but actually if you had even agricultural animals like sheep and cattle, or even chickens, you can get a really diverse sward and different lengths of grass, and that's what the RPA do up in the hills and the uplands. They just reduce the stocking rate and actually get completely different and far more enhanced wildlife. So I think there's room for everything. And of course, the big issue that nobody really wants to tackle, and there is no easy answer, is actually the conflicting interest between the public, the residents, and their dogs, and actually wildlife. And whether it's flying birds or running animals, or underground animals for that matter. And I just wonder whether you've taken any measures to try and restrict some areas literally for the benefit of wildlife rather than residents. So effectively rewilding, which of course is the bigger agenda as well. Even rewilding, I suspect, will need managing in time. The other thing I was just going to ask about, and picking up really Councillor Chapman's point, is I'd very much like to see a list of the varieties or species of trees that you're planting at the moment, and that can include shrubs as well. I'd like to think that there was quite a few fruiting species in there, whether it's acorns or chestnuts or even apples, can live quite well in a wood. So if the officers could send that to the panel, that would be quite helpful. The other thing I was just going to mention really is how pleased I was to see you're going to start up a tree nursery again. And of course, the site at the end of Spring Lane was used as our nursery for years. And I believe you're thinking of moving it to Highwoods, but I am conscious that the site at Spring Lane isn't used and actually is fenced and secure. And I just wonder why you wouldn't consider using that. You're probably going to heal it in all these whips that won't be planted this year. Because I did notice Rosa's report does say that February and March are going to be, all these whips are going to be planted. Well, forgive me, we're halfway through March already. So they will need healing in. The other thing I was just going to ask about was shading. Obviously, north facing, south facing, the sun, everything else has a terrific impact on the type of habitat and the type of wildlife you'll get. So do please think about where you're putting these trees and what they will be like when they're 20 meters high. It will completely change the outlook and the wildlife beside it, not only in it. The other last point I was going to make is that you're engaging with landowners, and forgive me, I am a landowner, but you just need to be fully aware, as I'm sure you are, that the DEFRA and the RPA are coming out with new schemes, probably in about 2024, which farmers will be signing up for 5 or 10 years periods. So they'll be quite reluctant, I think, to probably allow large-scale tree planting before the rules are made effectively. So you may have to just wait a couple of years before you come up with their regulations and suggestions. But otherwise, great work going on. I'm glad you're looking at routes into town, and I would just put a plea in for the road from Mersey. It's a very busy road, but actually it would make a fantastic site for a cycle path all the way from Mersey to Colchester, not only for people coming to shop in Colchester, but actually all the tourists and the children wanting to cycle down to the beach. We need to all be fitter and keener, don't we? And paths like that will help. So thank you very much, Chairman, and I'll look forward to hearing the answers.
Thank you, Robert. The last point I'll just pick up in terms of a cycle path Essex County Council, their LCWIP consultation is happening currently and closes on the 7th of April. And that is about cycling and walking and their plans, their more comprehensive plans for Colchester with that and how they'll spend their money. And I think that's an absolutely perfect solution or suggestion that you've put forward from Mersey. I think that would really, really work. So please do look at that consultation on the Essex County Council website, and we can obviously take that up as well. Thank you. Just a plug there for those keen on cycling and walking, which we are, and I'll move to Councillor King.
Thank you very much, Robert. All as we would expect, no less, very thoughtful points and helpful also. I'd only add to what Mark has just said about the route to Mersey. Is I think all our sense of realism is that's will be medium and longer term, but it does chime with every conversation for my part that I've had on active travel, which has been focused on, and it's hugely expensive, as you will understand, getting even a few miles of improvements in and around Colchester. And it's to say we've got to have a network, and we've got to recognise the gaps, and we've got to just do the difficult thing, which is keep working away at it. Government policy is gone the right direction. Funding needs to follow the policy, and local authorities like us have got a voice and a role to play, both in contributing sometimes, but also making sure the focus stays where it should, which is improving condition quality. And as I say, the connection. There's no point in having half a mile of great cycleway and then nothing but dangerous road. So it's a long haul, isn't it? Let's be frank, but it's the right thing, and I think we're going the right direction. Hope to be hanging around still for when it's possible to cycle. We are keen, as described. On the DEFRA piece and grants, it was the point I was trying to bring out in the exchange with Nick earlier. Yes, the team are aware of this, and we understand, of course, why landowners will judge the right time for them to follow through. That's the sensible thing for them to do from a financial perspective. But there will be some exceptions to that. Some will be prepared to go earlier, and we can certainly have conversations ahead of time to ensure that they look in our direction to the extent that we can make a difference to their judgment. Of course we will. In terms of north and south, not a point I've thought about, although it's plain, isn't it? How land lies, where warmth and cold are where height, and the interrelationship and the impact also that we may have on the landscape. That for me, my colleagues may have all thought about that. I hadn't. That's very useful. Thank you. I'm sure that where we've been taking advice, that has been factored in from the experts on the team or those advising them. But as I say, I find that personally very helpful. I'll ask Rosa or one of the team to talk to the tree nursery. I've just been pleased at the whole idea of us doing what we should do for the longer term. It's about self-reliance and in-house work. I think it's a sign and signal, isn't it, of commitment and the way that we should. Trees and shrubs, yes, we'll send that list. I'll ask Nick to do that if you wouldn't mind. We do take, I'll just say out loud again, careful advice. And I think, again, it's one of the good behaviours of recent times that certainly for our part as a local authority, we do set the right kind of example. And what we bring in, we talk to Woodland Trust and others as described earlier. In terms of, and let me see what else it was, diversity of habitats. The only thing I would sort of say on this is, of course, we should think about all the variety of impacts and engagements that humans, which is your other point, and those that they farm, how they farm and how they manage land, what that has. And of course, there are some benefits from it. I would just observe this, that Highwoods, or 2 points really. At Highwoods, of course, we do have cattle grazing, and as I've said to the rangers before, that was introduced. That was a decision to introduce it that changed the landscape. You have a conversation about whether it's better for it or not. It's certainly different for it. At Cymbeline Meadows, where that work lies ahead, there are discussions about how the land management and the agreements have been signed up can be reconciled with some changes to land. So I simply put, I expect that we'll have, I don't want to get in trouble with Mark again, mixed uses, no housing lands and animals. And your wider, higher piece really is about the impact of humans on the landscape. And this is something I reflect on fairly often, because the truth is very little in the world around us is not now managed by human beings or impacted by what we do. And it's an interesting philosophical but very real point. And I would just say, and I'm sure you would have said this, the fact we're on this call now and the fact this council in hard times is putting resources into what's a widening array of interconnected projects, that program of change here that is about biodiversity is absolutely much more than tree planting, which is where we narrowly started. That is recognising our responsibilities. So I sigh about it. I see here in North Colchester, I'm on the edge of housing development. Where this house is was once roses grew. Before that it was heathland. Some woodland remains. The paths around here are cut up and destroyed by humans and their dogs. So I regularly reflect on this, but it is what it is. At least this authority is in the right place. So thank you so much for your remarks. Can I just go to Mark, if that's okay? I'll go to Rosa, and she might want to pass it on to talk about the tree nursery. I think that's the one outstanding point.
So in relation to tree nursery, it's just something exploratory at this stage. Annually, our countryside rangers work with communities to do seed gathering events each year, and it's something that we unfortunately couldn't do with residents and our community in the last round, but we try to encourage that online, and that's something that we will continue to do. So we are interested by a concept of whether a tree nursery is something that we could achieve, but it is very exploratory at this stage, and I think if we were to pursue that, would be to look at how we could deliver that through the community rather than as a council project, but very, very exploratory at this stage. And you mentioned Spring Lane. It's part of those considerations, but at a very early stage, if we were to pursue that and make sure that it's actually something viable and sustainable going forward in terms of the future. I just wanted to mention about grazing animals, and you described about how grazing animals contribute and help support certain areas, and actually that is an approach that we take at Highways Country Park. So there's a particular patch of land, field there, where we do have grazing animals, and their activity of grazing encourages different plant life and contributing insect life as well. So when next time you're at Highways, do take a look, because there is a field with grazing animals doing exactly what you've described. So it is an approach that the council already takes with assets that it already manages, and Highways is a perfect example of that patchwork of different use, as Councillor King describes, of how we do hedgerows as well as meadows, as well as tree planting, etc. And it's about growing that really across the rest of the borough, that approach. Yes, I think I'll finish there.
Thank you, Rosa. Thank you, David, again. I think, Robert, as mayor, I'm sure you can bring some of your animals into the town and parade them around. I'm sure it's just like having the freedom of the borough.
They're not very well. Sorry, Chairman, they're not very well trained. I'm afraid they'd be worse than some of the residents. One thing I forgot to point out, my background tonight is Peldon, and you might notice it's a triangular village. The roads are triangular. But actually the middle of it is a complete heartland with nightingales and open spaces and hedgerows, and all residents deserve to have open space on their doorstep or nearby. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. The last person to speak is Lorcan, and then we have given this quite a thorough going over, but it is one of the main substantial items and a big project for our council. So, and now a programme which is absolutely on running. So, Lorcan, please.
Thanks, yeah, and thanks very much for the report. And I'll try and keep it brief. I just wondered, have we done, or do we have any kind of wildlife biodiversity audit, or is such a thing possible? Do we have a picture of of the overall kind of biodiversity assets throughout the borough, because as we're sort of reclaiming stuff and improving things, it would be good, I think, to have a picture of how that's improving on the kind of aggregate level, and also we sort of wonder, we have a lot of these a lot of policies that are handed down to us from central government and other places, which are kind of imposed on us, which impact on our ability to maintain biodiversity in our borough, and such a thing might be a useful tool for resisting some of that potentially, I guess. So yeah, that's my question.
Thank you, Lorcan. David, can you help?
I will go to Rosa. I'll just say, Lorcan, thank you. It's an excellent and productive challenge. I say for my part, I would say I don't know. I suspect that we have, certainly we know we have classifications and sites of scientific interest. We have nature reserves, and we have knowledge. I suspect that finding it in one place is going to be the challenge. But it is a fair point, and it is a question I asked the team in the very early days, which was whenever I searched, I struggled to find clear data around, remembering the starting point was tree coverage, which is very low on the available data. There are some interesting tools around for canopy mapping for those who find that interesting. Sadly, I do. There are some audits of the tree landscape and loss, one of the things we're going to pick up on. But an overall audit and assurance about it against which you measure progress, because I think that's an absolutely critical point for us. We do know what we're doing, I suppose, but natural loss elsewhere through tree disease and so on, that's, I think, more difficult. But I'll ask Rosa, and then she might pass it on to David or to Nick as appropriate to see what they can say. It's certainly something that I'd like us to look at if we can, but I could see how it could consume more resources we haven't got. But Rosa may surprise me unofficially. Rosa.
Yeah, so Councillor King's right, there are a number of audits and surveys, mainly from the national bodies, that can identify and describe our local areas in terms of the analysis that they do. So we've got that higher level information. What we are wanting to do going forward, and again, bearing in mind that this project or this programme has evolved from the Woodland project to the Woodland and Biodiversity project, and we've been evolving our learning and understanding of what that means for us as a council going forward. We're keen that going forward the year ahead, and in particular where we're looking at increasing biodiversity on our sites, that we actually use that as an engagement tool with our local residents in terms of monitoring and helping us assist with monitoring those sites, because I think that's a really good engagement tool, because then it means that they understand the impact of the approach that we're taking, and therefore, seeing more butterflies or more birds, etc., makes it really tangible as a reason why we're doing what we're doing, particularly in areas things like no mow, where it does look like we've just stopped it or just left it to do its thing, or we've forgotten about it. But if we can do an engagement exercise, maybe with local schools, as we described in the report, where they're producing little signs that explain that this is a no-mow area, and engaging with the schools to do a piece of work where the site can be monitored and then fed back to us, it will help us with that. There will be other more formal ways as well, but we want to use, as it describes it, as more of an engagement tool, because the impact will be much more powerful rather than us presenting it as numbers in a report. So we do look at that, and in terms of our own sites, our own countryside sites, etc., we do all of that monitoring, and we're fully aware of those species that are at risk, or that we have to really carefully look after and preserve, and that's part of the work that we do in terms of managing those sites anyway. So there's a number of different ways that we can get that information, but as Councillor King, probably not all in one place, and I think it's part of the work that we're doing to develop that going forward.
Thank you, Rosa. That's a really positive answer. And I suppose, thinking about it, we could never know for sure across the borough, because there's so many private plots of land that are our gardens and houses and homes and land that we own. But one thing linking to some of the comments before, and again, from a Wivenhoe example, I know that a sort of subgroup of our town council or a community group, Wild About Wivenhoe, tried to do that kind of thing, an audit mainly of our public spaces. So again, it could be through parish councils that we ask of them to do an audit of our public spaces in their parishes and villages, and look around the urban town centre about what we can ascertain and understand. But just a thought going forward. But your answer was really interesting and is the right way to do it and engage more. So thank you. Thank you. I think that we've pretty much covered every aspect of this paper and many positive ideas going forward, constructive contributions. So thank you all to those on the panel for those. Thank you, David, for coming and for your work on this. I know I gave this project to you early on, and it's now expanded and grown, and I do enjoy coming along with you on it as well, with my passion of trying to increase biodiversity as well as woodland. And Rosa and your whole team who have been here this evening, so from Nick and David and Rory, the whole team. So thank you for this great program of work that's rolling on and going in absolutely the right direction. More engagement from public, more engagement from experts will continue to make sure it hits the right target. And we actually, as a borough, can be proud of our commitments to increasing biodiversity and decreasing carbon as much as possible. So thank you. It's a legacy to be proud of. Good work, and thanks for the report. Matthew, do we just need to note that report? There's nothing we need to agree on.
No, Chairman, that report is just for noting. If you're happy to deal with it by assent, that's absolutely fine.
We'll do it that way unless anyone dissents. I think we've noted that and covered that well. Thank you. Excellent. And moving on to the next item, item 8, is the new climate change and sustainability strategic themes, because we're starting here with themes rather than the complete strategy at the moment, so we can ensure we engage and make sure that is as focused as possible. So I'm going to go to Maggie. Over to you, please, to introduce this report.
Thank you very much. I'll just ask Gillian if she could put up the first slide, please. So you've had the report, so I won't go through it, and you can see it's got quite a lot of material there. But what I wanted to do is just give you an overall presentation of how we've come to this point of having the strategic themes paper as well as the climate emergency action plan. So unfortunately, my presentation doesn't have any great videos of community members speaking, but I'm sure that will come at some point. I'll just pause to allow the first slide to come up.
Maggie, we're having some technical difficulties at the moment, I'm afraid. You okay to give us a couple of minutes?
Yeah, no, I can just speak to the paper. I'm really excited about this piece of work because, you know, what we said was we need a separation in our previous meetings between the strategy that we have outlined in various pieces of documentation, like the strategic plan, like the climate emergency action plan that was developed in 2020. What we wanted to do was have some real clarity on what the strategic thinking was and what the actions are in separate documentation. So as we went through this exercise with officers from across CBC as well as our companies, we came out with 8 headline themes. And these themes really cover the breadth of our work. And then we've got some critical objectives under each of the themes. And together, really those, oh, thank you very much. So you know who I am, so we can go to the second slide, please. So what I've just gone through is why we need one. What we have and what we need. This is the overview of the presentation and how we've developed it and what's currently in the draft short strategic document and how we're going to build on that. And then we'll pull out some of the themes and then look at the climate emergency action plan that's been updated. So next slide, please. Thank you. So as I've said, you've requested this in previous meetings. Our environment and sustainable strategy document ended in 2020, so we need to come up with our new strategy document, and that was really by pulling things together from across different areas. I'm not going to have very much joy with this, am I? And then we've said we want the comprehensive strategy of our council in one place. So that's why we've got this new document, which we are calling the Climate Challenge and Sustainability Strategy. Next slide, please. Great. So this is what we've got. Currently, we had the sustainability strategy. We've got our strategic plan. We have the climate emergency action plan developed in 2020, and we have our carbon management plan from 16 to 2020. So what we need to do, our journey, is to develop the climate change and sustainability strategy, update our climate emergency action plan, and then develop a new carbon management plan for 21 to 26. So the two documents that you've got in the report are the bones of the strategy document and an updated climate emergency action plan by across the service areas and by amphora companies. Next slide, please. So the phase one approach is how we're communicating this out, is that we're looking at this in phased approaches. So what you've just seen me do is go through the process of what we've got and do an analysis of what's missing. And then our future phase will be to take the document out to key stakeholders through our engagement plan and work much more with communities and residents and other partners to see really how we can fulfill the strategy. Next slide, please. So currently the strategy includes all of our strategic ambition. It frames our climate emergency action plan and it aligns to our strategic plan. It sets out the monitoring and communications of the progress of our plan, and it highlights some of the good work that's been achieved between 2019 and 2020. And then it gives you a little email entry point into how you can learn more about the council's work on sustainability and the climate challenge. So the future iterations that we imagine of the strategy could include a theory of change approach, which I'm very keen on, the targets for each of the strategic theme being communicated a bit more succinctly in terms of what are our targets and how that will help us meet our carbon emission reduction targets as well. And then the engagement approach and resident survey feedback. Potentially, we could have more themes that come up, such as digital sustainability. We might look at financing models. We might look at carbon offsetting as another theme. So this is going to develop as we go, because there's already some work around our digital sustainability. We're beginning to look at carbon offsetting. There's always a need to look at financial models for achieving our climate emergency action plan. Next slide, please. So as you see in the report, we've got 8 themes. The first one is our primary thematic area where we've got the most emissions. So reduce carbon emissions from our building and fleet to help us achieve net zero. And then we've got produce renewable energy. I think it's important to pull that out because that's something that we're doing that's innovative and showing that we're thinking about this holistically. I don't have to speak long about the biodiversity because we've spent time on that already, and that's such a key thematic area for us. And we've already discussed how that links into the walking and cycling and sustainable transport. We also need to look at our sustainable waste management and support residents to reduce, reuse, and recycle, which we have been doing and we need to continue to do. And we want to build more on our enabling partnership and community action for sustainability and low carbon development. And also importantly is our work to ensure sustainable planning and development, to make sure that all of the work going forward is in line with our strategic goal of reaching zero net by 2030. And of course, we have to change the way that we work to achieve all of this. So it's quite a lot, but it's already happening. Next slide, please. So what I wanted to do with this is to just highlight some of the actions within the Climate Action Plan of 21 to 23 that you've got in the report. I recognize that it's more than 50 actions, and please remember that behind these action areas are projects like what we've just been talking about in terms of the biodiversity project. So there's quite a lot of work behind a lot of these actions. And what I wanted to do was just highlight some of them that will be perhaps new because we've identified them for this year. So we'd like to look at building maintenance program to be explored and how to incorporate the carbon management plan within that. We've got some key assets that are being developed or redeveloped, like the Shrub End Depot. We're developing a carbon literacy training for staff, and we're looking at 100% renewable electricity tariff. And we've already started thinking about electric vehicle strategy and procuring electric vehicles and installing charging points. Next slide. So you've heard some of this already before. We're very excited that we've got the grant to decarbonize our own house. We're looking at designing a development document for the local plan on sustainability and carbon reduction, and that'll really help us to achieve sustainability and planning. We've set out our Hero for Zero challenge for staff to get involved and excited about how to reduce emissions and pledge some different behaviors that they're going to incorporate, showing their recognition of the importance of behavior change as well as behavior change in the workplace. We've mentioned this a little bit in the discussion already, but we're reviewing the natural asset list and connecting that to our principles and approaches for offsetting. We also want to explore the remaining actions of the carbon management plan and the carbon trust recommendations and ensure those have been taken up. And then we've got a final slide, I believe. Yeah, so outside of our target, which are equally as important, include things like updating our procurement policy to include sustainability, encouraging CBH to begin the process of conversion of their fleet to electric vehicles. We've got our 100 Homes project, looking at retrofits and put in place to look at tracking the emissions of projects that are being developed. And the final slide, I believe, is just for your questions and feedback.
Thank you, Maggie. That made a lot of sense to me, and it's a nice time to sort of see it put together, brought together, bearing in mind we've got the action plan alongside it. So it's absolutely the right time to refresh this, make sure it's clear, and the way you just presented it was absolutely clear to me. I just wanted to pick out a couple of things. I know that Councillor Gocher mentioned this before, and it's something when helping our planning team about biodiversity gain and net biodiversity gain, and making sure that we we understand what is being meant by that, and actually by going further, because it often is a bit of a greenwash, I think, that some developers are using. So I'd like to ensure in our strategies that we are focusing on that. And I know that's a tiny bit of this whole report that we will pick up with our planning teams, but one thing I wanted to pick out from conversations we'd had before. And secondly, you talked about renewable energy, and Matthew, sorry about this. I want to jump all the way back to Grace Dark's original question, because I forgot to answer one point. If it can be minuted in that way, or it can be minuted underneath this report. But in terms of, she talked about solar and asked about the Essex County Council programme. That's something I was not aware of up till now, and I'm not sure that we have put it out through our comms. So I just wanted to ask our teams, I think Mandy Jones or Dan Gascoigne this evening can relay that to our other parts of the council who can put out those communications, because we're talking about renewable energy on our homes and on our buildings and elsewhere. I just want to make sure that that good point from Grace Dark can be taken forward. Mandy, did you want to add to that, please?
Yeah, yes, I wasn't actually aware of it either, and I'm not sure whether Maggie was, but I haven't asked the comms team, but we can certainly have a look at it and of course publicise it. I just had a quick look when I got it through, and it does look like an interesting scheme. I think just on our own housing stock, our focus has been where we can make the most difference in the reduction of carbon emissions. So, you know, that we've got the work planned with the Carbon Trust on this to determine that, I think. And we're also reviewing our asset management strategy for our own stock to look at where we can make that difference in carbon reduction and energy efficiency. So solar is a kind of part of a mix, but we were just, you know, I was just saying we need to sort of look at it holistically in relation to our own stock and other ways. So we will be doing that. And also part of our decarbonisation programme through the Housing Investment Plan has got all of our housing stock to be made C or above, energy rating C or above by March 2022. But we will be continually looking at that in a kind of agile way as well, and making sure we've got the newest technologies and ensuring that we are including solar in that mix as and where it's the right thing to do, basically.
Thank you, Mandy. And thank you, Maggie. I'm sorry for going so far into the detail straight away. I'll just step back and say thank you. I really feel that you've gathered those themes perfectly. So I'm really happy with how you've done that. And I'm really glad that you're excited about this strategy as well. So thank you from me. There's no further questions. So I'll go straight to Peter. Peter, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I agree with you. I think Maggie has done a great job here. It's not an easy area to describe in a way, to present, which I hope will be done to the public, what the council is doing, its themes and its actions. I think this is a great way of doing it. As this is a draft, if I may just make one or two small additions, or if you could consider these, please. First of all, on the themes, on the preamble, I would just like to ask you to include mention of the Carbon Trust, which I think has been very important to the council in its approach and continuing approach to this work. So I think they should get a mention somehow. On item 1 and the fleet transition, you mentioned obviously electrics. I just wonder if you could mention and other technologies, and I'm thinking of hydrogen, because this program is over 7 years, and I think some of the larger vehicles, perhaps the freighters, may well be using hydrogen in the future. So I think just broaden that to other technologies, perhaps. On the action plan, if I may use the numbers you use, 4.5, this is the walking and exercise. I would like to see the inclusion of the Colchester orbital, which I have a personal love of, having walked it with others. And I think as something for the Colchester, it's quite important. And at 6.9, and this is where I wanted to raise the matter of presentations to the public. I have a request from one of my parish councils for a presentation on what the council is doing about the climate emergency and what parish councils can do, what suggestions you have for us, in other words. And I think this is an opportunity for officers to perhaps get together a presentation for perhaps groups of parish councils to start with, and then for other organisations and commercial organisations, particularly in the town, and eventually to roll this out where people are asking for information. I've been asked quite urgently for this for the parish council, so I don't want it all to be forgotten until we all come back in the new municipal year. So if that could be taken aboard, I'd be appreciative, please. That's all, thanks.
Thank you, Peter. And I think you did bring that point up to us and officers in our organisation group. So I completely back that. I think there's lots to say, including about the biodiversity project to our parish councils. And when we started up this work 18 months ago or 2 years ago, we did say we would use parish councils as a conduit for more information and really engage and partner with them as much as possible. I'll just say two other points. One, I did walk the orbital with you, Mr. Mayor. You were mayor at the time, sorry, and enjoyed that. And secondly, I hope the current mayor is putting recycled paper into his printer, as I can see in the background. All right, thank you. Over to you, Maggie, please, to pick up some of those points.
Sorry, I was having problems with my unmute button. Thank you, Councillor Chillingworth. Those are very good feedback. Yes, no problem about the Carbon Trust. I've reviewed that already since the spokesperson debrief meeting. And I will take in the other point around electric and hydrogen and just work with the service area to double check that. Regarding the orbital, it's actually in 4.7. And 6.9 around the communicating with the town parish, that's no problem. I'm really engaged, and looking at the next step is really about developing an engagement plan and how we can create a clear narrative around the work that we're trying to do. As you said, that it needs to be succinct, it needs to be striking, and it needs to be empowering, and it needs to be equity-based and linked to our ambitions. So that's going to be the next step. And I love this kind of work. And I'm happy to do a presentation as when the parish councils are available and bring in some of the examples of what they can do by working with the other service areas and developing that a little bit. And we've got already some good ideas of what people can do as we're updating our website. We're already documenting some ideas of how they can get involved in their community in the local area. So that's all very positive feedback that I'm happy to take on board, and I thank you for them.
Thank you, Maggie. Both Peter and I have contributed. I can't see any other hands up, so I think people are happy with this, happy with your approach. Good. Okay. Therefore, Matthew, this is a substantial report, so I think it would be good to have a vote on this if that's appropriate.
Yeah, absolutely fine, Chair. The panel in this is being asked to agree the first phase of the climate change and sustainability strategy themes for consultation on a document, and also the updated climate emergency action plan running from 2021 to 2023. I'll proceed through the voting in alphabetical order. Councillor, you would just indicate whether you're okay with the proposals, please. So, Councillor Chapman.
Yes, very happy.
Thank you. Councillor Chillingworth.
Yes, sorry, agreed.
Thank you. Councillor Davidson. Thank you. Councillor Gocher.
Agreed.
Thank you. Councillor McCarthy.
Agreed.
Councillor Scordis.
Agreed.
Councillor Whitehead.
Yeah, agreed. And thanks for all your work on it, Maggie.
And Councillor Corey.
Agreed, absolutely.
Lovely, thank you. That's unanimous, Chair.
Thank you, Matthew, and thank you, Maggie, for that. Okay.
I just wanted to say that it's really a team collaboration across the service areas, so I can't take all the credit. So, but thank you.
Well, thank you, and thank you for presenting it so well this evening, and yeah, to the whole team behind it and across all the council service areas making this work. Thank you. Okay, next up we have number 9, which is the government emergency authorization of the anti-bee pesticides. So we kept this on the agenda, but are fully aware that the government for this year have decided that there is no need for this pesticide use. I thought in discussion with the other group spokespersons that we would keep it on the agenda and look at whether or not we set a principled point about ensuring that within our borough we hope to advise and lobby with MPs to ensure it isn't used. So thank you to Ben who put together a report which included more chance to research further with some links, etc. And I think annexed to that was the letter that I originally sent to our local MPs, and just to see whether we felt it was right to continue with that as a panel, as an advisory note in a sense into the future. So I know that councillors, some of you felt it was appropriate that we continue with this and put a line in the sand almost. I know, Peter, you talked about the fact that Robert will be here this evening to talk from an agricultural point of view, and welcome that as well. Peter, I'll go to you first.
Sorry, I'm fiddling with my... Yes, Chairman, thank you. You know, I was slightly unhappy about this appearing on the agenda because I felt you had sent your letter and we were therefore unnecessary to have it really on our agenda. I think we must be careful how we use staff resources. I think we should be using it where we are looking at items which the council are in control or it's our sphere of interest. And I don't want to see this panel developing into a campaigning organisation, a talking shop, in other words. We've got a very important job, I feel, to support and drive forward the excellent work that the council is doing on moving to carbon neutrality and greening the council's estate and influencing the community to follow our lead. But do we really need to discuss every environmental problem as they arise? I think not. Chairman, having got that off my chest, I would just like to make a few comments about the item. I thank Ben for his excellent report. Let's look at why the government has brought in this derogation. Last year, after a mild winter, aphids propagated and they fed on the sugar beet crop, a non-flowering crop, and caused a spread of disease, virus yellows. This caused some farmers up to 80% loss, and it's really endangering the future of this important crop, particularly in the eastern counties. And to avoid a similar situation this year, a seed dressing containing the banned chemical is being allowed for 125 days. And various conditions have been applied, such as no flowering crops to be grown the next year, etc. But as you say, this year we probably won't need it because the aphids were killed off in the frost. So it probably isn't necessary. And this is really my point, that we're wasting time and officers' time in looking at this. I know you and other members of the committee feel strongly about these issues, but I'm not sure we should be spending too much officers' time and our own time on it. The government followed the science, and the science is saying it's not going to affect pollinators. And I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. I've tried to ensure we aren't wasting officers' time here, and just having a very basic report that includes the letter that I have written and just the links to the facts. Because I do understand what you mean. It doesn't affect our estate as such and our direct control, but it is one of those things that we could have our advisory or influence on. Talking of that, I'll move to an expert in the subject of farming, Councillor Davidson. Robert, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Yes, and apologies, I keep losing my internet, but I'm here at the moment anyway. Yes, Chairman, I was more concerned that, choice and personal choice is really important in this world. And when people are choosing their food in the supermarkets, they can choose to have organic or vegan or anything else, and that's absolutely right that they should do that. Likewise, the council, and forgive me, you're leader of the council at the moment, so you're authorised to act on our behalf, can determine what they do for the benefit of their residents, but really only within their own estate. As Councillor Chillingworth already pointed out, the law of the land says that this product will be allowed for very limited use for very good scientific and economic reasons. And actually, none of those crops, I don't believe, are grown on CBC land. And it's not really for CBC to influence it without realizing what the economic and rotational disadvantages are from not having that chemical. And that's my concern, that Ben's report's very factual, but it does only give one side of the argument. It doesn't give the farming side, for example, which actually, forgive me, produces food which everybody requires. So it's fine for the leader and the council to have strong views and passion, which is important, but actually to control what happens within your estate, which is actually what you're doing with both the carbon reduction and with the biodiversity in the trees. So that's my main point, really. The real reason for the continuation of this product, for what it's until we have now got, I believe, one variety of sugar beet that is almost resistant to yellow virus, but they're not there yet. And sugars are very important. It produces 50% or more of the British sugar crop in the supermarkets. The rest of it comes from the sugarcane industry in the Caribbean and elsewhere. But also, the other key thing is that the withdrawal of this product has been happening over 2 or 3 years. And obviously, oilseed rape, which was alleged and proven, I think, to affect some bee colonies, that was withdrawn many years ago. And for that reason, the acreage or area of oilseed rape in the country has gone down by 60%, and is still reducing rapidly, because actually there's no way of overcoming that the benefits of that compound. The other thing that affects me personally is cereals. That we had a seed dressing again, and the reason for seed dressing is that, of course, there is no physical contact between animals or plants or insects and the actual product itself. But again, it was to stop a virus which affects the crops in November to February, when actually there's very little physical activity by pests as such. So, but after February, that seed dressing runs out of steam. So actually, for when spring comes and all the wildlife is buzzing around the crops, actually it has gone. But that has also been withdrawn. And the big point I wanted to really make was that the alternative strategy that farmers currently have is to spray every 4 days with a cypermethrin or effectively a systemic insecticide. And that is totally worse because it's hitting populations of insects that never would have been affected by this. Varieties of and species that actually are resistant to the viruses. And as we know, coronavirus, of course, has been it has been a pandemic, and it's amazing how we've managed to find a control for that within 10 months. Mm. So all I'd say is that the bigger picture is we should be guided by science, which the government are. If it's legal to we want to grow crops legally, and actually, the public need the confidence that actually farming is acting responsibly, and that's what I'd say we are, in that there is proof that the limited use of this compound, which doesn't flower until the 2nd year, by which time the seed dressing would have well gone, and that's only for collecting seed and not for the actual sugar. It is not affecting crops. So anyway, that's my little rant. But I think there's room and there's a need for safe food, and I believe that this current government has chosen the right path. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. I very much appreciate and understand the points you've made and those made by Peter. I appreciate your experience and contribution there, which is very much in depth and gives a bit more on top of the paper that we have. It makes me think about perhaps our role could be about constructively and positively in the borough, because of our remit, which is to go beyond just our organisation, is to talk about responsible farming and encourage that and look at other ways in which we could mention that. One thing I would say is that we have talked about landowners earlier tonight. We've talked about rewilding and tree planting. We've also talked about private gardens. So in terms of, I do believe we have a role beyond our own estate. So I do put that point of principle back to the committee. And the second point for me as well is the biodiversity loss that potentially is caused by the reduction in pollinators as a result of this pesticide. So I'm very much open to committee feelings on this one. As Peter says, I have sent a letter in my own capacity already to MPs. But there's one point that came out of what Robert said there that makes me think, is there something where we can more constructively and positively talk about farming responsibly within our borough? That's something we could look at going forward. I have Councillor Mark Gocher next, so over to you, Mark.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I just want to say that I do appreciate the positive things that the farming community have done to increase biodiversity and to deal with the declining bees by a third. There have been some very interesting schemes, such as leaving the areas around the field wild, the verges. The farming community has made a very positive contribution to this. Also, my grandfather was a farmer during the war. So I am aware of the feelings of the farming community and the needs of the farming community. But in terms of some of the points made, I tend to agree with Councillor Corey in that we are actively asking for the involvement of the public and the community in the promotion of biodiversity. We've talked about private gardens, and so why why would we not engage with the farming community and what they're doing? Why would you say it's just up to them, let's leave them alone? They are part of our borough as well and our community. And what the farming community does affects the environment in general, and therefore affects everyone. So I don't think we can just say we're only concerned with our own council property on this, because we're not doing it with the Woodland project and other things. So I'm going to be a bit provocative in some ways. I mean, we're talking particularly about sugar beet, and I would ask the question, is that really a crop where there is a large future for expansion, given the concerns we have about the health aspect of sugary foods, sugary products in the supermarket? I'm sure there'll be an answer to that, but I just want to throw that out there. Are there better crops that we can be promoting the growth of? Do we really need the sugar industry to be as large as it is? I'll just put that one out there. But I think my primary concern is obviously the decline of bees by a third. Now, it's obviously not just because of this pesticide. It's very complicated indeed. And a lot of it is to do with habitat loss. And there have, as I've said, been some excellent schemes within farming to address the habitat loss issue and the loss of flowering wildflowers. And I mentioned meadows earlier on another item. So I think it's important not to give the impression that we think the only cause of bee decline is the use of this particular chemical, because clearly it isn't. And there's a whole plethora of things that will need to be done to solve the problem. But I do think, given the approach to this chemical in other countries, like, for example, within the European Union, I think it's concerning if this country diverges from what is a consensus elsewhere, that this chemical is harmful to bees and is not something that we therefore should be encouraging the use of. Because once you start allowing caveats, so we don't want this used except here, then the exceptions become greater and greater. And on the subject of legality, just because something is legal doesn't necessarily mean that we shouldn't have an opinion on it. For example, use of glyphosate is legal, but we have a view on that. So I don't think we can say that because the government says this is legal, that we don't have a view on that. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Mark. I next have Councillor McCarthy, and then I'll come back. So Sam, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm going to play devil's advocate, I guess, now. And it's not going to be a provocative statement like Mark Gocher mentioned that one of his questions were. I read an article shortly after Councillor Corey sent letters to our local MPs in Farmers Weekly. At the bottom of that article, when I'd finished reading it, it said I had one more article remaining until I hit a paywall. Well, I thought to myself, I'm never, ever going to have to go back on Farmers Weekly again. But I've just dug that article back up. And as someone who, I've lived in a town and a city all my life, so I don't know anything about farming. So I'm just throwing this out there on some of the points that I found in this article. There's research ongoing to find alternative control methods. And one of the solutions for beets is biodegradable plastic film covering. The colour and finish of the film doesn't attract aphids. Trials carried out last year were encouraging, and initial assessments show that plots were mostly virus-free. Pesticides and insecticides would not have been required, and it's proven to mitigate the yield loss. Again, pleading ignorance here, would this still have an effect on the bee population? And could we, as a council, potentially lobby our local MPs to support farmers in rolling out a biodegradable plastic. I'm just throwing that out there to create debate, that's all. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Sam. We've had a lot of debate tonight, and I'm aware of the time, but I do appreciate that. And just before I bring you in, Councillor Whitehead, I'm going to put a marker down here because I want to ensure consensus as much as possible on the panel as well, and take on board the point just made by Sam. I wonder whether instead of the letter that I'd originally penned, we could look at welcoming the decision made by the government recently to not use this chemical, or to not allow the use of this chemical, and to support different approaches, and to actually use the example that Councillor McCarthy has just come up with and put that to MPs. And secondly, to put in that letter that we support responsible farming. And I do think it is a subject that is possibly of interest to our work programme in the future. Responsible farming. I know, Sam, you're a vegetarian. I've sort of changed my diet in the same way over the last year. And it's about actually things that the public might find interesting, that we do some of that work for them. Just a thought. I know that the point that, Peter, you've made about officer time, I want to be absolutely cognizant of that. It could be something we engage the public on, because we are looking at better engagement about just thinking about responsible farming. Where does your food come from? Where does the packaging come from, etc., etc. It might be a different angle. So I just wondered whether in terms of getting consensus on this, we actually send a different letter that welcomes the decision, that supports different approaches and can include different innovation like Sam has put forward, and support responsible farming. I just wonder whether we take that tact, and if that is something that will get consensus, because I will reiterate the point that I do think we have a remit beyond just our own estate that we have agreed upon in other examples on this committee. I'll let you think on that, and I'll go to Councillor Whitehead in the meantime. Lorcan.
Thank you. And yeah, I mean, it's been a very interesting discussion to listen to. I'm glad in a way that we don't have to make a decision, as far as I can tell. Reading the report, it's more just for discussion, and I'm glad about that, because I think I like perhaps others on the panel feel maybe insufficiently aware of all the technicalities involved around this, but I agree with others who have said that, you know, the council does have a role to play beyond its own holdings and things like that, you know, in giving a view and shaping public opinion, and you know, around an issue that's incredibly important, you know, ecological and climate change issues, and that's, I think, you know, part of what the original motion encouraged the council to do. Yeah, I mean, as I say, I can't kind of claim to have a great insight into the scientific debate which is underlying this. One thing that nags at me, though, is why the change. You know, we had the position endorsed by the government that they weren't, that they thought that these chemicals were too dangerous to our bee populations to use, and now we have a changed position, and so, you know, my concern is that, you know, that is perhaps because an opportunity has arisen now that we've left the EU, and that it's an instance of lowering standards. So that is a concern for me around this. And I also, you know, wonder if there are other alternatives. I mean, Councillor McCarthy mentioned some that are being explored, presumably EU countries which use these methods are having to look for those other alternatives. And it does seem like if you remove the ban, then you remove the incentive to look for alternatives. So yeah, I mean, as I say, I hesitate to kind of form a very definite view on this, but I do have concerns.
Thank you, Lorcan. I see Councillor Chapman has raised his hand, always a man of consensus. Do you think you can agree to my suggestion, Nigel, or have you got another one, please?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I find it's difficult. I sort of follow Lorcan's view on this. It's a difficult one that I don't think I know enough about. And I wasn't at the last meeting, so I didn't hear the debate that went on at that. I think it was on the last agenda, wasn't it? Yeah, I mean, I think I would wish to have something on the way of more consensus. I think one thing again is similar to Lorcan, really. I think that I'm stubborn, and I think having made that decision to ban something, I am somewhat unhappy to go back on that. I think once you make a decision, then you should stick to it, and I'm not. Otherwise, you can keep on finding some good reason not to continue that ban on something that clearly should be banned at the end of the day. So I've got issues around the whole thing, frankly. So yeah, consensus would be helpful. Whether we need to do this today, could we not come back with a consensus view for the next meeting? Will be next year, won't it? Next fiscal year. That's probably the only difficulty, I suppose. I'm open to suggestions, Chairman.
Thank you, Nigel. Well, I've put forward a suggestion that could talk about the future agenda of this meeting. I agree with you about. I understand why it's not as urgent as it was because of the government changing their mind again, in a sense. So that's okay for this year. I'm worried about further years, etc. In a way that you did describe. Once they've made a decision that I would have agreed with a year or two ago, to change when it suits. So I'm very supportive of us saying something that's supportive of the farming industry and supportive of the current decision made by the government. And actually looking at a future agenda item that takes more time to look at responsible farming and impacts within our borough. I see, Robert, you've indicated again, hopefully you've got some more thoughts or can agree on a consensus.
Yes, I was hoping to just respond to some of the points that have been raised, Chairman. And I wouldn't say I was the authority on any of this. But I certainly have got experience. And really the government were in a rock and a hard place in that the sugar industry, whether we like it or not, is needed. We're now out of Europe, and that gave them the opportunity to change their permits, if you like. And that's the only reason. I'm sure it's only a short-term change. And the reason for that is, as I said earlier, there is already one species of sugar beet or one variety that actually is tolerant to this virus. And the breeders will need 4 or 5 years to come up with more and more alternative species. So I think the answer will always be in science. It will, the research, the millions and billions are being spent annually around the world. And in fact, farmers pay a levy for every ton that they produce, and that all goes into research. The government put a significant amount into research every year. And of course, the international commercial companies that actually breed these varieties, it's in their interest to have something as well. So, and the other thing is, Councillor Goetsch was asking about alternative crops. The problem was that at the end of the day, farming, whether you like it or not, has to keep its head above water. It has to be profitable, and that's becoming increasingly difficult. And the two main alternative crops to cereals in this area, because of the dry weather, were sugar beet and oilseed rape. They were the best paying crops. They were the ones that could help keep us afloat. Those are both really going and have gone because of the lack of the right chemicals. That leaves us with very much smaller crops like linseed or grass or something like that, neither of which really are reliable. Peas and beans aren't anywhere in there either. They're just, they'd be about 20% of the income that a good sugar beet or rape crop would produce. So believe me, if farmers found an easy way to grow something that didn't need chemicals, they'd be delighted to do it. We don't spend money for the want of it. It's because it's needed, and that applies to all crops. But anyway, yes, it's a short-term measure. just another bit of information, it's only for sugar beet, and so turnips, forage crops that are grown for cattle, even though they don't flower, they're not allowed to use it. So all the Swedes and turnips and things that the cattle would be relying on to eat in the winter, they may be decimated because they're not allowed to use this seed dressing. So the government have been very specific. It's only for the sugar production. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Well, I felt that a middle way could be a letter that welcomes the decision, that suggests we support looking into other ideas, such as the alternative Councillor McCarthy put forward, and then to support responsible farming, which is putting support behind our local farmers. And we could do a letter like that. I'm happy if we'd rather wait for that to go, or we put that down as a marker and then look at a following agenda item in the new municipal year about this kind of subject, and responsible farming and responsible eating, etc., responsible purchasing, and how we advise the public. So that's a recommendation I'm putting to you that's slightly different to what's in the paper. So stepping back a bit from what's in the paper. Peter, I'll ask you for your thoughts and then I will put forward.
Well, I agree with you about trying to achieve consensus where we can. I feel perhaps postponing it until we have a proper debate. You have sent one letter out fairly recently. It seems rather strange to send an almost contradictory letter soon afterwards. So what I would suggest is that we do postpone this. We have a debate on sustainable farming, perhaps. At that time, perhaps we can send an appropriate letter. That would be my suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you. We also would need a bit more time to engage with the public, I think, about responsible farming and understanding where their food comes from. I think that can form part of when we're engaging with the public going forward on environmental sustainability. So I'm happy, therefore, to put this on as another agenda item in a different guise, or take this back to our spokesperson's meeting and look at the work programme and where we could fit something like this in. How do members feel about that? I will go around the committee because at the moment we've got no other ways forward. So I will go in order of alphabetical order. That's Councillor Chapman first, I think.
Yes, I'm happy to support that suggestion, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Chillingworth.
Yes, I said what I felt.
Yep, thank you. Councillor Davidson.
Yes, I'd support it going to the work programme. And just one point, Chairman, just to say that I think it's really important that we hear the other side of the debate on whatever we're discussing, and then we can go out to the community as an informed councillors rather than having a one-sided debate.
Thank you, and that's what I feel with engaging in terms of responsible farming. I'd like to hear from those. I know companies like Fairfield, who potato farms within the borough, who do very well at crisp production. That tastes good. Councillor Gocher, please.
Yeah, I think we do need to put a marker down, personally. Obviously, the pressure is off because of the government decision, but I do think it's such a major issue that we do need to be putting a marker down for the future, because I do feel that this is only the first example of what are going to be a string of examples of this kind of issue, where we are diverging on environmental standards from our neighbours.
Thank you. So you suggest still doing a letter? I mean, I have already written as leader of the council. I can always speak to you offline about that, but that's your clear steer. Thank you. Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you. No, I'd agree with you, Chair, and the previous councillors. I don't think a letter is probably required at this time. I'm not too sure.
Thank you. Councillor Scordis, please.
Yeah, I mean, I would have agreed with your middle of the road approach, but I'm happy to go with the group consensus on this one.
Thank you. And Councillor Whitehead, please.
Yeah, I'm happy with the suggestion also. Let's go to group.
Okay, thank you. Well, we'll go with the suggestion I think made by Peter. It seems consensual by the panel. Mark, you and I can talk more about another letter that I write if you want, from 2 marks from teachers marking the government. Okay, so we'll take that panel. Thank you. That we'll put this on the work programme going forward. We will definitely not let the government go past with any different decision without putting a letter. That's what I'll say. I'll put that marker in the sand, Mark, that whether I'm leader or chair of this panel, etc., I'd like to bring that back if the government look again at changing their minds. So not for this year, but perhaps next. But in the meantime, we'll take to the work programme a discussion around responsible farming, bringing in all participants and looking about how we engage the public on that one. So more work to be done. Thank you for that discussion. I'm aware of the time, so I'm going to suggest we have a short break and come back at 20 to 9 at 2040, and then we'll carry on with the rest of the agenda as swiftly as possible. Is that okay, Matthew?
Yeah, by all means, Chairman.
Okay, please mute and turn your screens off, councillors. Thank you. See you at 2040. Okay, Matthew and councillors, hopefully you have been able to have a short break and return for the rest of the meeting, which, as I say, we should be able to finish quite swiftly. We've had some excellent discussions this evening. So I will continue on with the agenda, hopefully with other councillors coming back to the screen shortly. Okay, so item 10 is the Climate Emergency Action Plan update. So I will ask Ben to come forward, please, and give us a short update from the paper that is in front of us. Thank you.
Hello there, Leader. Thanks for that. So I'll just bring up the paper now, and we'll go through it as quickly as we can. So, so first of all, decarbonisation of Rowan House. Obviously, we all know a lot about this, but very good grant bid that's successful for £528,250 for increasing the energy efficiency and decarbonising Rowan House. So the technologies that have made up the bid are listed here. So the installation of an air source heat pump that will replace the current gas boiler, provide a source of low carbon heating to the building. Also installing a mechanical ventilation heat recovery system, which would be a good way to provide ventilation to the building and prevent heat being lost from ventilating the building as it is at the moment, which is done for opening windows. We'll also be installing a building management system to help monitor temperature within the building, ensuring that the heat pump is used as efficiently as possible. Boosting of roof insulation and also replacing existing in external and internal lighting with LED lighting. And all these changes put together are estimated to produce an overall emission saving of 139.6 tonnes of CO2, which is a considerable amount of our overall footprint. And the works to decarbonise the building are occurring alongside a wider project to do basic repairs to the building and also the changing use of office space sort of post COVID and sort of return to the office. So where we will only occupy one level of the building, and this will go sort of alongside greater levels of working from home, which we've been doing at the moment. The next significant item is on the Green Homes Grant Local Authority Delivery Scheme. So this is one part of the Green Homes Grant. It's a government scheme that local authorities could bid in for to basically get funding to apply to households within the borough to increase the energy efficiency of the building. We're looking at insulation, and we are part of a consortium bid that Essex County Council was successful in getting. And it provides funding of up to £10,000 for households on low incomes or benefits, and where their energy performance certificate rating of their home is below an E rating. And the programme will run until the 30th of June 2021. And we have been promoting this ourselves, reposting content from Essex County Council social media, as well as promoting with community organisations through Community 360. And when the scheme ends, we'll be in June, we'll be able to provide figures on how many homes have been retrofitted in Colchester, which determines some sort of benefits from there. And there's also a second phase of the scheme that's we've very recently been told about. Similar kinds of thing, just more money will be available for residents to upgrade their homes, and we can provide further details when they become more available and advertise that to residents also. In terms of other updates, as Maggie mentioned earlier, we've got our Hero for Zero monthly challenge on at the moment, which is encouraging staff to adopt a environmentally friendly behaviour and hopefully take it on through doing it during the month. And at the end, the staff will receive a reward for taking part, so part of that sort of like incentive for doing it. But hopefully they'll do it without a reward in the future. But anyway, so we're a good place to start. We've got a survey out at the moment. It went on Monday to help us understand from residents about the council's work on the climate emergency and how they currently hear about that. And that's sort of like the first stage of our engagement with residents. And as Maggie has said, we're very keen to produce a more formal engagement strategy and engage with residents further. This is the start of it. So I'd really appreciate residents filling this in, and also councillors promoting it to residents through ward pages and however else you contact residents as well, because it'll be really useful for our comms and engagement going forward. Also thought it'd be good to highlight a guide we produced at the end of last year. We didn't mention it at a panel meeting, but it's a householder's guide to sustainability and energy efficiency improvements they can make to their homes. It's quite a simple sort of visual guide, and it links in with things like the Green Homes Grant Local Authority Delivery Scheme, and also potentially the voucher scheme as well going forward. So it's an interesting one for sort of residents to look at there. We've got the Colchester Business Centre, Colby, redeveloping their corporate strategy to include corporate environmental responsibility within that and reducing the environmental impact of their operations. And CBC officers are helping them to develop a KPI within their strategy, and as part of their lease that includes a reduction of environmental impact within their work, which is a positive thing going out sort of into the borough. The Clean Air for Colchester project that's been brought to panel meetings previously has recently been featured in the Clean Air Day 2020 Insights and Celebrations report, which highlighted the action taken on the No Idling campaign in October 2020. And the Clean Air Day this year is in June 2021, I believe. So I expect the team will be doing more actions around that. And the final one is something that was raised to me by one of the rangers in the Castle Park about some of the work they've been doing, and I think it's really useful to highlight it. So they've been doing some litter picks along the River Colne in a canoe. So it's quite a niche way of doing it, but it's really obviously useful. And the planting of native trees to form hedgerows as part of the Woodland and Biodiversity project, which we know plenty about. The team have also been looking at purchasing an electric gator vehicle to be used along the e-cargo bike, along with their e-cargo bike, to do their operations within the park, which is really positive. And they're also developing some plans to improve the Riverside Lake, an island that is just outside the Castle Park, to benefit wildlife and carbon capture. This is at quite an early stage at the moment, but from what I've heard from the ranger, it sounds really positive, and it's definitely something that we bring back to a future environment and sustainability panel meeting, as sort of this biodiversity element that everyone's sort of keen on going forward. And that's it. So happy to take any questions or anything after.
Thank you, Ben. As always, lots on, and thank you for leading all of that work and across the organisation, of course, with the team behind you. I only had a couple of points really, because it's also so much fantastic work. The Rowan House project is excellent. Thank you to those who are involved in the bid and to be so successful, to be able to turn around our Rowan House site in such a way that you've described is fantastic, and a really good legacy for us going forward. So really pleased about that. Thank you. The Green Homes Grant is something that I think we need to promote even more. And actually I can go back, well, I can ask you, but also go back to some of the teams that I cover in the customer portfolio, to ask the benefits team, some of whom councillors here. There's a presentation this week from the excellent team within customer services and benefit support. You do a great work to support our residents, but perhaps if they aren't already promoting the Green Homes Grant sort of at the end of the call, then something we could look into, doing it directly when on the phone to residents. And lastly, the whole Hero to Zero thing, I'll once again mention, because I've had an email from an interested resident about a vegan diet for the council, or in terms of the catering that we provide. And we're not a catering council, that's usually for upper tier authorities. So I have made clear to that person where we stand with this, but actually it might fit into the Hero to Zero project, because what we eat, our diet, vegan, vegetarian, does have an impact on climate change. So it's just another thought that I'm sure you've had as part of that scheme, but just to add in. Otherwise, that's all from me. Thank you. I'll go to Councillor Goach and then I'll come back to you, Ben. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Ben, for the report. It's excellent. Can I just, or can we just have an update on the issue of electric charging points? Where are we with electric charging points for vehicles? Because a resident was asking me the other day, that's all.
Yeah, I can. Well, I'll come back to say I'll direct that question at someone else. Because it's not one of the areas I'm directly involved with, and I expect that someone else might be able to be better placed to answer than myself.
Ben, whilst we think of which officer would be more appropriate, are there any points other points to pick up from what I'd said, or just to acknowledge?
Yeah, so the hero pursuit and the promoting of the veganism, yeah, it was something that I'm aware of, and I know that we do have quite a few officers within the council who are quite keen on promoting this as well. And I think it's something that we've definitely looked at and that we can promote through sort of staff behaviour change. I don't think there was anyone who said that who was doing it as part of the Hero for Zero, but it's something that you can continue to promote, yes.
Thank you. Rory Doyle, please, can you come in and help us with the electric charger? Rory.
Just get my video to work, Chair, sorry. Oh, I can't see myself, but I assume that you can see me. Thank you, Councillor Gocher. So we're undertaking quite a significant amount of work around electric vehicle charging, both within our own fleet. So we're incorporating infrastructure shortly at Rowan House. And we're also looking at future-proofing our depot for electric vehicle infrastructure in future as part of our fleet transition strategy that the panel heard about in a previous meeting. We also have plans within the parking strategy to look at EV infrastructure in some of our car parks. What we do need to develop, and it's a piece of work I think that we're incorporating within Maggie's team now, is a wider strategy around electric vehicle charging. We need to consider it in the round, really. It's difficult to start looking at it in a piecemeal approach. It needs to be part of a much wider strategy, looking at transport strategy generally, modal shifts and everything like that. So it's kind of quite a diverse and holistic piece of work we need to undertake. But also through the planning work and new developments, we're looking at encouraging electric vehicle charging in those circumstances. But when you consider our existing streetscapes and things like that, we need to work with a wide range of partners to develop an EV strategy in that respect. I hope that helps.
That was very helpful. Thank you, Rory. And I think part of that is about private developments as well, as you say, but also private companies putting them in place and putting them either accessible for the public, for example, at Waitrose. I know there's some there, or at Tesco's, etc. Sorry, there are other supermarkets available, but also for companies and for employees. So something we'd like to pick up on next year, I think. Thank you, Mark. Are there any other questions? Okay, otherwise I think we note this report, and thank you, Ben, again for that summary and the in-depth report that comes with it. Thank you. I know there's lots going on behind the scenes, and it's great to know that this time, sort of 18 months ago, Ben was just coming into post, and we've got Maggie now on board. So the whole team is exponentially growing alongside the project. So we really are taking dynamic steps to address the climate challenge that we face. And actually, even before that, we were rated by Friends of the Earth as joint third in the country for what we had done. So onwards and upwards. On that note, I'll say thank you in terms of, I've seen no dissent to that report, so we can note that and move to the work programme, which is about what we do as we step further forward. So item 11, the Environment and Sustainability Panel Work Programme. Matthew, I'll move to you to just present what's coming forward. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. As you're aware, this is the last meeting of the current municipal year. And the work programme has been concluded for this term of meetings. There's an item, obviously, that you've asked for to come back from this meeting on responsible and sustainable farming. To be looked at in the future, so that will make its way onto the next work programme. And working with officers and group spokespersons for this panel, a draft work programme will be put together for the first meeting of the next municipal year for you all to debate and agree going forward. And if you're happy with that approach, yeah, that's all I'd say on the subject, Chair.
Thank you, Matthew. I think it's pretty clear. We talked about it at the group spokespersons meeting. We're happy with the work programme. In the new municipal year, there might be, because there's a few months between the next meeting, now there may be new items that come on board or new priorities. So we'll have to see about that, and we'll come together as a group to decide on that. Okay, can we agree again with assent? Thank you. I see no dissent. Okay, so that's noted, Matthew, and agreed. Therefore, I want to say thank you all for participating this year. We've got lots completed, lots of irons in the fire, a sustainable fire. And we've also got the engagement survey out at the moment, which started this week. And I do encourage you to have a look at that. In the comms update that you will receive this Friday, tomorrow, there will be a link to that. So please do expand that out as much as possible. It's about engaging with the public, which is part of our key remit to ensure we bring them on board with our journey on the climate emergency challenge. Okay, thank you all. Good to see you all. Take care. See you the other side of May. Most of you.